Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. My Angular in 90 minutes crash course got 0.6 million views plus and a lot of comments, and after that my React in 90 really got a good response. And the next question everybody was asking was, when is the Next.js in 90 coming up? Well, here it is. And trust me when I say this, even if we have AI tools right now which you can use for vibe coding or AI assisted coding, which I personally prefer, you will see that by default, whether it's Lovable, V0, Gemini CLI, Claude Code, ChatGPT, all of the AI tools create projects which by default are built with Next.js. You use Next.js with TypeScript for front-end and back-end, you use Postgres as the database, and you use Tailwind CSS for styling. And that's exactly going to be our tech stack. And even though you can have this vibe coding, AI-assisted coding, generating code, if you don't really know how Next.js works, you can't really go too far in your project because you won't know how to create API routes, how to create different pages as routes in your Next.js application, when to use server-side rendering versus client-side rendering, and when to use incremental static regeneration. So all those core concepts you're gonna learn in 90 minutes in this video. But not only you will learn the core concepts of Next.js, but will deploy a production-ready application on Vercel, having a production database as well that is live. So everything that you see right here is a deployed production application, and it's not just a to-do application. So you can essentially take inspiration from it and actually make it your own to add to your portfolio. As I mentioned, the tech stack that we are using is Next.js 16, React 19. We are going to use Prisma ORM for connecting to our database and writing our queries in JavaScript, which essentially would turn into SQL queries. And then we are having Postgres as the database. And I love DaisyUI as the framework on top of Tailwind CSS because it's really beautiful and it's really highly customizable as well. And we are using Tailwind CSS 4. Now, this is an app that allows people to create agent skills that they can publish publicly, and people can use those agent skills within their tools, for example, in Claude Code or Gemini CLI. And if you don't really know what agent skills are, watch this particular video in which I explain agent skills in detail and how you can create your own skills as well. But this is a public repository of skills, so to say. So I can go to browse skills, and here I can see that there is a guy named Asanayaz who has published their first skill. And if I go there, this is the skills content, and I can copy this and essentially use this within my AI tools. Now you will also see that there's a dashboard, which means that this user is right now logged in. So if I open it, you can see that we have the name of the user right here. We can go to dashboard. We can also create our own skill, and we can log out. So if I go to the dashboard, I can see how many skills I have created. I've created one public and one private. You can see also which one is public right here with this sort of badge here, and I can edit my skills. For example, I could go to the private one, and here I could say test skill and something like this, and I can make this saved, and that is saved now in the database. If I go to my Neon database, go to skills, you can see that both of the skills are right here, and they're updated when I change something. I could also go here and make this public, which would make this publicly available on browse skills. So now you see two of my skills instead of one. And as I mentioned, you will also learn in this video when to use client-side rendering versus server-side rendering versus incremental static regeneration, which in this case is happening every 60 seconds, which means that this page is automatically rendered after 60 seconds. And if in the meantime a lot of developers come to this page, they will see a cached version, which means our server will not get a heavy load if thousands of developers start coming to this browse skills page. Furthermore, we do have authentication within this application, and it's going to be a simple email password authentication, but it uses the cookies to save persistent authentication, which means that I can close my PC, come back again maybe in a day or two, and I would still be logged in because I would have the cookie still there, and until the cookie expires, I'm gonna still stay logged in. And apart from the demo application, I also have slides in this video, which actually were really appreciated by the Angular in 90 and React in 90 viewers. So brace yourself for this. And having said all of that, I want to say that I'm really excited for this video for you to go through with me. And if you think this is a good video already, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you will be notified about the further videos as well. And of course, always you can comment in the comment section what kind of videos do you want me to create, so I keep this channel getting better and better. Well, that's enough of the introduction talk. Let's actually get to the video. Okay, so first thing first, just a bit about myself. So my name is Mohammed Ahsan. I'm originally from Pakistan. I'm a Google developers expert in two categories: namely AI and Angular. I'm also an author of 3 books. I've been working with Angular for about 13 years and with React and Next.js for about 6 to 7 years now. I'm also a software architect at Scania, which is in Sweden. I'm also someone who has created a lot of open source libraries, including this one called NGX Device Detector. And this one has over 13 million installs on NPM. This image is a bit outdated and over 5.5 thousand projects on GitHub using it. I'm also someone who loves to hack, code, and also go to hackathon. This is one of the hackathons that I won in Stockholm, Sweden at the Google office. And I'm also someone who has been featured by Google on their official LinkedIn platform as well when I was working with them on a campaign for Google Gemini. Now let's get to the substance. So this is Next.js full stack crash course, and we're going to look from just React to production. However, we are not going to go too much into the React side itself, but we are going to talk about that in a bit. So this is what you should know so far. You should know already how React works, how components, hooks, JSX, all of those core concepts of React. And if you don't know about that, you can see this particular video, which covers the React in 90 minutes, all the core concepts that you need to know. Then you should also know JavaScript and ES6. You should know async await for making API calls, etc. Then you should know HTML and CSS, of course. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to build anything for the browser. And you should know a bit about Node.js, like what Node.js is, how do you install Node packages or NPM packages, how do you run a dev server, how do you build, so all of those things as well. But we are going to cover these in just a teeny tiny bit as well, if you even don't know. And these are the tools that you're going to work with. You're going to be using Google's Antigravity, or if you prefer VS Code, that's fine as well. But I really like Google's Antigravity because it's an IDE that is an agent first IDE. So you do have access to Claude Opus 4.5 and Gemini 3.0 Pro as well, especially for complex tasks. And you can work with MCP tools and whatnot. So give it a go and try it and see how you like it. One of the things that I really like about Antigravity essentially is that it is having all those tools that you may need for your project. For example, generating images within the editor itself, or working with files, or just creating code using the agent. All of those things are really helpful, but we are going to look at the code ourselves quite a lot in this crash course. You should have Node.js version 22 plus. I would say just install the latest one. You should have Git. You should have Docker, because we are going to use local Docker instance with PostgreSQL, which means that we would have our database spun up inside a Docker container, and our backend or our Next.js application will be connecting to that Docker instance. We can also create a production or cloud database as well. For example, neon.db is a really good one that you can get a Postgres database for free, but we are going to essentially look at that at the end as well. Then you should also have a Vercel account, because we are going to deploy our Next.js application there. And we are also going to talk about TurboPack, which is built in with Next.js. Now, the agenda for today looks like this. We will cover Next.js fundamentals and how you set up a Next.js application, and we are going to do it from scratch. I know that this is an era of AI and, coding everything by just having your coffee and not even looking at the code, aka vibe coding. But we are going to cover all the concepts because I know that you want to learn the core concepts as well, and a lot of developers have showed this interest to me. Now, apart from Next.js fundamentals and setup, we are going to look at the app router and how does file-based routing work in Next.js. We're going to talk about the rendering strategies, for example, static side generation, server-side rendering, incremental static regeneration, and client-side rendering. We're also going to cover server versus client components. What are those? What are server actions? And how do you connect with databases? And finally, error handling and loading states. All of this is really important for Next.js, and if you know these concepts, you will see yourself becoming really fast at just creating different features, different layouts, and all of them being really good for user experience. Finally, we are going to deploy this for production, and we'll see what do you need to have as a checklist when you're deploying. So this is what we are going to build. It's called an agent skills manager. If you don't know about agent skills and you're watching this video in the future, that is maybe in February 2026, you will already find this particular video, which is about agent skills, what they allow us to do with our coding agents like Claude Code or Gemini CLI, and how do they provide more accuracy as well. So this particular application is just a manager for our agent skills. Let's say you have an agent skill for YouTube videos content creation, or you have an agent skill for JavaScript optimized code generation or design patterns expert, whatever that agent skill may be, you can essentially go here and create a skill and save your skill as a markdown or a text inside our application. And then you can manage them. You can always go there and copy paste somewhere else as well. Since our database is going to be live as well, you will be able to access it anyways. We will also have some sort of authentication in here as well, so you can use your email and password to log in from any of your devices, and you can make your skills public. For example, if you had a Next.js DaisyUI bootstrap skill, which means that you could give it to Claude Code and you could say generate a new Next.js application, it would use this particular skill to build exactly the kind of application that the skill suggests. For example, using Next.js 16, DaisyUI, maybe you can mention a particular theme within your skill. So anytime you try to generate a Next.js application, it will use that skill to build exactly the kind of application that you want with the skills. So this is going to be the application, and these are the features. So we would have a create and manage AI agent skill, which means that we will be able to create skills, and we are going to be able to edit skills as well. We will have user authentication. We are going to use a package called bcrypt, and we are going to use HTTP only cookies. We're going to have a public skills gallery with incremental static regeneration, which means when you go to this browse skills page, you will see all those sort of skills generated, but they will regenerate after a while. And I'm going to talk about the incremental static regeneration throughout this video. Now we'll also have Postgres database. We'll connect with Prisma ORM, which makes it easy for us to not write SQL queries or raw SQL queries, but use JavaScript functions and a Prisma client to interact with the database. So all we need to know essentially is JavaScript or TypeScript. Then we will create beautiful UI with DaisyUI, and we are going to deploy this on Vercel. And the tech stack that we have is Next.js 16, but obviously if you're working with Next.js 17, 18, I would say it's gonna be probably more or less the same unless Vercel decides to throw away the core concepts away. So we'll have Next.js 16, React 19, Tailwind CSS, DaisyUI, Prisma, and Postgres. Now what is Next.js? Next.js essentially is something that is a bit more than React, which means that you get the React as it is, but then you have more features on top of it. So Next.js is not something that is not React, so to say. So it still uses React, but it has more things, including the setup. For example, so when you start with React, you have two options. You either create an HTML file and you include the React.js library yourself manually like a sociopath, or you use a tool like Webpack or Vite to create a React application. That is the usual setup. With Next.js, again, you don't have to worry about that, because all you need to do is just run one single command and it does all the setup and generates the application flawlessly. And you're going to see that when we are able to create a Next.js application by just running one single command. Then we have a built-in routing setup in Next.js. We have the server-side rendering. By default, we have API routes possibility, which means you can have your backend APIs within the Next.js project. And then you have a zero config production build, which means that as soon as you create a Next.js application, you can just deploy it without any further configuration. And that is amazing. Now, what is the difference between Next.js and React? And this is a question that is asked like throughout the internet. So let's discuss one by one. When it comes to vanilla React, the only rendering type that we have is called client-side rendering, which means that React essentially looks at a very empty HTML and then renders the whole React components on the browser, on the client side. Let me give you an example. So this is an application called Zuban that I created, and it's available on GitHub. But if I go to the UI here, this is how it looks like. And the features that I'm using in this particular application, the AI features, are usually working in the Chromium browser, not Chrome. So the Chromium one is where you have developer or preview features as well. But anyways, this is a React application. We have some inputs, we have some buttons here, a lot of things going on here, right? But do all these buttons come from the server? Not really. If I right click here, go to view page source, you're going to see that the HTML that we actually get back is quite empty. You see the body only has this div with the ID root, and this is a really core concept to grasp. With React applications, what comes back from the server when the browser says, okay, I'm going to go to this URL. When it goes to this URL, what gets returned is just this HTML. And And what is returning this? It's the GitHub server. So I have my application deployed on GitHub Pages. So if I show you, maybe you already know, maybe you don't know. If you go here, you'll see something called Pages. And I am deploying my site, my React application, just to GitHub Pages, which is really easy. And when I go there, this is exactly what I see. So this is coming from a GitHub server. So GitHub's computer, in easier words. When I right click and go to page source, this is the only HTML that comes back from the server with this script. So this is the JavaScript that I also get with this HTML. And when this HTML loads this script, or the browser loads it for the HTML, this script contains all the code to essentially initiate React and then create all those components. So this whole code that you see is quite a lot. I'm not going to go through this, of course, but this JavaScript is essentially running React and creating all those components. And we can see even here as well. When I right click here, if I go to inspect, and if I sort of expand it and go to network, go to all and refresh, you're going to see that this document, this HTML document that I get is essentially empty. If I see the response, this is exactly what I showed you from the page source. So this is what comes in. Then we also have the JavaScript coming in. We would also have some CSS somewhere as well, if there is any, or maybe the CSS is already included in the JavaScript file as well. But that's pretty much the concept. So this is a client-side rendered application, which means an empty HTML comes back from the server and the browser or the client side renders the whole React components. That is client-side rendering. And if you want to visualize this, this is how it looks. Your browser tries to request the HTML. When it comes back to the browser, then the client-side rendering happens. So after the browser has parsed the HTML, loaded the JavaScript, then React kicks in and builds all the component in the browser itself. When we talk about the Next.js side of things, it by default has something called server-side rendering, or SSR. Now, SSR means that this HTML that you see right here is going to be built on the server. Then another thing that we have is called SSG, which means static site generation. We're going to talk about these in depth, but this essentially means that we are going to have a statically generated site, which means when you build your Next.js application, that is when you see this HTML being rendered. Now I'm going to show you an example. So if I go to my website, which has my courses, this particular site itself is rendered on the server when we are building the application. So if I right click this, go to view page source and see this, you're going to see that there's a lot of HTML coming in. A lot of it is the rendered UI. So we are not getting an empty HTML, unlike here. So here we got an empty HTML with ID root. In this particular case, we're gonna also get a lot of things in the body itself. If I scroll a bit up, let's see if I can find it. And in here, you can see that in the body, we have this div, we have this div, we have this div. So a lot of HTML here, but I want to find a content. So let's say I want to find this web development basics. So I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna go to the source and paste it. And here you can see that we have this HTML called web development basics, Urdu, Hindi, and then we have the description here as well. So all of this is actually coming from the backend, which means that when the browser tries to get this particular page, not this one, but actually this one, then the server sends back this whole HTML. So it's already rendered. So the user doesn't see a blank sort of screen for even a millisecond because this is already rendered. Another benefit of having a server-side rendered page is that the search engines or web crawlers can immediately see the content, which helps, for example, search engines like Google to rank your page higher in the search index. For example, if someone tries to search web development basics course Urdu Hindi, since my server already sends this whole content and the search engines can see this, they will rank my application or my page higher in the Google search index. When someone searches it, it would be shown at the top. But if my server sent something like this, then the search engine cannot see anything about web development basics or anything as such, because the HTML that's returned is this. And then the JavaScript kicks in, builds the components and all of that. But when search engines are going in, they're not really having a browser. They don't really look at the page. They don't let the React application render on the browser. They don't have a browser at all in this case. So they can only read the HTML. So that's why the server-side rendered pages or the statically generated pages are always going to be a bit better. Similarly, pages which are like about page, which is like a static content, and it will not change unless I want to change the content again, which means I would go to the HTML of this code and then change it myself, rebuild the Next.js application and deploy. When I rebuild the application, that's when this content is generated or this whole HTML is rendered, and then it's available every single time. And we are going to see some examples of statically generated, server-side rendered, all of those things. The second thing that we have is called routing. And in React, the routing is, I'm mentioning here as external because React itself is a tiny library. It's not a framework. Angular is a framework, Next.js is a framework, but React is a really teeny tiny library. And it doesn't have a router of its own. It uses usually React router, or when you're creating a React application, you usually have a React router to allow different pages. So React applications are like single page applications, but you can still have routing within it. So you can build multiple applications, even though the application theoretically is a single page application. When it comes to Next.js on the other side, we do have built-in file-based routing, and we're going to look at that, what that really means, which means that you don't really need another library or an external third-party library apart from Next.js itself to build different routes, and we're going to see how easy those are. In React, we don't really have API endpoints. So React is a front-end library. So only anything that happens in the browser is part of React, or building the components or having use effect, use state, all of those things. But it is not a server-side library. So you cannot make API endpoints in React. You have to rely on something else. You have to rely on a Node.js server, a .NET server, a Java server, whatever that API server would be to communicate with it. So the backend can connect with the database, because React application is a front-end side. So it is not supposed to have access to the database. So you go from your front end to your backend, and the backend goes to the database. On the other hand, we do have Next.js, which has a built-in API route, or you can create server actions. So Next.js has support for building backend, which means that if you have a Next.js application, you have your front end and your backend both in the same app. You don't need to have two different applications for a front end or backend. So that's why it's a full stack framework. Finally, when it comes to the setup, you need either a manual React application generation. For example, you should have your HTML, you have your React library that you're using, you have your CSS, and then you're using a custom tool like System.js or Webpack or something to build it. Or you can use the modern tool that we have called Vite to just create a React application that also allows building that application. And those of you who are a bit experienced in front-end development know that when you're working with an app in development, it's different than building for production. When you build your application for production, you minify the code, you minify the JavaScript, you minify other files as well. For example, here when we see this Zoban Gemini Nano, this is a built application. This is the whole JavaScript, and a lot of it is minified. You will see that a lot of the variables are really, really tiny. For example, A, B, C, sometimes, what is this code? So a lot of this code is supposed to be compressed, which takes lesser bundle size when you download it. Also, it makes it harder to read the code as well. So a lot of people cannot copy it or see the actual logic within the code. And when it comes to Next.js on the other side, you have this create next application that can be used to create a Next.js application, and the same tool chain or the same application has all the commands like running in dev mode, building for production, and whatnot. Now, this is going to be the structure of our application that we are going to create. We are creating an agent skills manager that will have a bunch of things like an auth folder, it would have a dashboard folder, it would have skills and whatnot. We're going to look into more later. But first of all, we are going to create some basic routes, and we are also going to see those differences as well when it comes to static generation and server-side rendering and whatnot. So first of all, let's create a new application, and then we'll take it from there. So all you need to do is you go to the desired folder where you are, and I'm in my terminal right now. So you can open your terminal or command prompt, whatever that is with your current computer, and then you are going to do npx create next app and then at latest. So when you run this command, it will ask you to give your project name, and it might even say before, do you want to install this package? Just say yes to that, and then once the package is installed for you, you are going to give the name here. So here I'm going to say agent -skills -manager and hit enter, and now it's asking what is our recommendation. So I'm going to use the recommended defaults, which is TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind CSS, and app router. So by default these ones. So I'm gonna hit enter, and now you can see that it's installing all the dependencies for us. So every package, every setting that we need for the Next.js application is already being installed and we don't have to manually do anything. Great. Now that the application is created, let's open that into Antigravity. So I'm going to use Antigravity and then the name of the project, but you can of course just open Antigravity and click folder or open folder and then select the particular folder. So I'm gonna close this one, and here we go. This is our Antigravity, which is an agent first IDE. So I'm gonna close the agent side for now because we are going to do a lot of things manually here. So this is our project structure. This is our app folder inside which we have page TSX or layout. And then if we look down here, this is our Next.js configuration. So as I mentioned, it's a zero config application. So you can see the object here is empty. And even though with exactly this particular configuration, I can deploy this on Vercel, no problem at all. And the code that we have right here is very minimal at the moment. So what I can do is I can open my terminal, and you can do that by going here and then going to terminal and here new terminal. So you can open it like this, and then you can run npm run dev. So we already have the packages installed. Otherwise you would have to run npm install first and then run this. So now this is running on localhost 3000. So I'm going to copy this, go to my browser, and I'm going to open a new tab and just open it right here. So this is the default Next.js page that you get right here. You can see here it says deploy now. So I can just click this and this will start setting up the deployment for me. So what I want to do first is to tell you how do we create basic routes or pages. By default, any page TSX inside any folder is considered a route. This one, the top page TSX, is on this slash route. And by slash, I mean localhost 3000 slash, which means exactly localhost 3000. So if I go here, what is rendered is actually right here inside the app page TSX. Let's have a look. If I go here and close this down, the server is still running. But if I look at the app folder inside page TSX, this is the page that is being rendered. You can see the Next.js logo here. You can see the templates button. You can see learning. And here, if I go down, the deploy button here and documentation. And we see all of that inside our application. So here we have deploy now, documentation, we have templates, learning, center, all of these things are coming from the page TSX. When we want to create another route, all we need to do is to create a folder, and inside the folder create another page TSX. Now it's important to remember that the name of the file has to be exactly page TSX, otherwise it won't be considered as a route because that's the naming convention that Next.js has. So if we want a /skills route, then all we need to do is create a skills folder and then put a page TSX inside. So let's try this out now. I'm going to create a new folder, and a shortcut would be to just say new file inside a folder, and I can say skills / which creates a folder, and now I can say page.tsx, which means now I have a new route called skills. So if my page TSX is not there, let's say we name this something else, page X TSX, and if I go to my browser, go to my app and try to go to skills, then you'll see that it just says 404. So this page could not be found. Now if I go here and rename this to page TSX and create a function or a React component that returns an HTML, this is going to just work. So if I go here, I can simply go ahead and say export default, and here I can say function I would call skills here and remove this from here and rather say skills page. And since I'm using Antigravity, I already have AI assistance in place here. So now that we have saved this, let's go to the browser, and here you can already see, I can see this is skills coming from the code. If I go to the code, this is the content. So here I could say this is the skills page instead. Save this, and here you can see exactly the content coming in. Now if I wanted to create more folders, I could do that as well. If I go to my code here, I'm going to create another route called about. So I'm going to say the folder name is about / page.tsx, and that would create the about folder with the page tsx inside. Here I could say export default, and here you can see AI already predicts the convention, even the about page. So the page suffix also is here, and the content is similar to the skills page. Now if I go back here, go here, and if I try to say about, you can see that this says this is the about page. Now I have three different routes. I have about, I have skills, and I have the home page, and I can go back and forth between those as well. So now just by creating those files, we have the routing in place. We did not have to configure anything else. Is the beauty of Next.js. Now let's talk about something more. We also have something that we call route groups. Now let's say if I wanted to have in my application a route that is /login. If I wanted to have that, all I would have to do is to create a folder called login and then have a page TSX inside. However, if I wanted to at least have all my authentication route in a folder in my code base, then how can I do that? For example, I wanted my login and register route to be inside an auth folder. So if I go with auth here, and then inside here, I want to create a login route and a register route. So I'm going to say login/page.tsx. And similarly, I'm going to have inside auth register/page.tsx. So now my auth has two folders, login and register, and both of them have page.tsx. So if I go here, I say export default and then the login page. And then for register here, I'm going to say export default register page, right? Now, if I try to go to my browser and if I hit login, you can still see it says 404. Why is that? By the way, if you think I'm going too fast, that is because we have this 90 minutes crash course. So I don't want to go over time. So if you feel like it's too fast, just run on a slow speed or pause and go back. But we will cover all the concepts and you can rewatch it again to understand it better. Now, going back to this route doesn't work. And that is because we have in our code base this auth folder. So when the app tries to look at the routing, it says it's slash, which is app. So /auth/login. So that means I have to go here and say /auth/login. And if I try to go to that route, that of course works. If I go to the register route as well, of course that would also work. But the problem is I don't want this auth in my URL. I want this page to be at register or at login. And that is of course because it makes it easier for the user to remember those. So instead of having this folder like this, I would actually put that inside small brackets, and that is called grouping or grouped folders in Next.js. When you use these small brackets, it essentially does not count this folder in the URL route, which means now I can have just localhost 3000/login and that would be fine. If I now go to my browser, you can see the register already works. If I go to login, that works as well. So just localhost 3000 register, localhost 3000 login, now they are working, and that is how you group different folders. So we can have a group of auth routes, which could be login, register, and others as well. We could also have a group of dashboard, inside which we could have dashboard and other pages as well. So it's really easy to group those things together. And again, the concept of this, if you're asking why would someone do that, is just because we want to have them organized in our folders or in a group of folders inside our code. Next.js doesn't really care about the route when we do it like this, so we can organize any way we want to organize. All right, let's go to something called dynamic routes. And dynamic routes are really helpful where you would want to have a single component for something that shows different products, for example, or different items. So the UI would be exactly the same thing, but the details would change based on an ID of something. And a good example for this would be Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and if you go to a particular product, you will see that the layout always is the same. You have the images of the product, you have the price, you have down below recommended options, you have the details, you have the reviews, and that's exactly the same for any product that you go to. So the layout of the page is exactly the same, but the content changes, the image changes, the title changes, the price changes, the types of variations the product has, that changes a bit, but essentially it's the same component when it comes to React, for example. And in our application here, when you are on the skills page or when you are on dashboard, you can see all these different cards. Let's go to, let's say, browse skills here, which is the skills page. Now, when you click a particular skill, it would go to the detail of the skill, right? And it doesn't really matter which skill you go to, the layout is going to be always the same. So let me show you. If I go to dashboard and make this particular one, instead of private, I'm going to make it public. So we have two of those. So when we go here and go to browse skills, now we have two of those. If I click this one, then you see it's the same layout. Now the content is a bit less, but more or less the component is the same. It's the same route, that is skills/1. If I go to the first one, then it's skills/2. So what's changing in the URL is the ID of the skill, but the component, the UI is exactly the same. Some skill may have more content, some skill may have less content, but they all would have the same card. They would have the title, they would have a description right here, they would have this badge. It doesn't matter which skill I go to, right? So the layout is exactly the same, the component is exactly the same. So in this particular case, if we want a route that has this dynamic part, what we do is we create this inside a folder which has square brackets around it. So here, if I wanted something like skills/id, then this would be the skills folder slash the folder called id, and then we'll call it page csx. Now, this can be whatever. This is a variable. So here you could name it ID, you could call it identifier, you could call it IDX, whatever you wanted to call it. You could create just a folder with this parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the code now, and in here we are going to create inside the skills this folder. So first we are going to call this identifier. I'm just keeping it a bit big to show you that you don't have to name it ID, you can name it whatever. So here we have called this identifier, and inside here I'm going to create a new file called page.tsx. Now this means that whenever we have a route that is /skills/123 or ABC or DEF, whatever that is, this would trigger this particular page and this particular component. So here I'm going to call this export default function skill page, and here I'm going to call this skill details page, right? Now let's try this in the browser. If I go to my browser, go to the application, go to skills, you can see that this says this is the skills page. If I go to skills/ABC, now it says this is the skill details page. So it doesn't matter what is after this skills. As soon as there is something, it's going to trigger the same thing. So you can see here it's the same thing as well. Now the question would be, in our application, when we are on a particular skill, we see the details of that skill. So how do we connect these two things? How do we know that ID1 means bringing this skill into the view? When we go to ID2, this means bringing this particular object into the view. So how do we identify which skill are we talking about? So we need a way to look into this URL and then bringing that information inside this component or inside this page, so to say, which means that in our component, the skill page, we need a way to identify what is the URL, what is this identifier that we are talking about here. And that's exactly what we are going to learn now. So here we see how we can access parameters in Next.js 16 and hopefully afterwards as well. So what happens is that Next.js automatically gives you this particular object called params. So this is a prop, as we call it. So this is a property that Next.js gives to our component, and we can already receive it and extract out the information from it. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to type this so we can see how to do this together. Here what we are going to do is create an object with curly brackets. I'm going to call this params, and here you can see already that it's giving me how to define the types of what these parameters are. So if I just press tab here, you can see that we are saying, okay, this is the object which Next.js gives us, and this is the type of this object, and we can even make this a bit more clean by taking this outside. So here I'm gonna go and define it here. So export, or not export even, type skill page props, and here I'm defining the skill page props, and here I can say that this params or this whole object that we have will have a skill page props. So what I'm saying here is that this page receives some properties. Those properties contain a params object, and the params object contains this identifier that we have, which is a string. Easy peasy. Now that we have this params here, let's extract out that information. And this params is essentially not coming as it is. We have to await it. So here I'm going to say const identifier, or here I can essentially say something like this: identifier equals await params, which means that I now have to make this function async as AI is suggesting. So I'm going to make it async now, and now I'll save it. Now that we have the identifier, we can also go ahead and just show that as well. So here I'm saying this is the details page for, and here identifier. So I'm going to save it now. And when we go to our browser, you'll already see that here it says this is the skill details page for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's getting it from the top. Now if I say ABC, hit enter, now you can see ABC as well. So whatever is in the URL, we get that directly into the code. And now that we have access of that into the code, we can actually retrieve information. We can use this identifier to make an API call, bring back the right skill, and show that. That's exactly what we are doing in our agent skill application. When we essentially go to a particular link, we get the URL, then we go to the database and see, okay, where is the skill for the ID1? Then it brings back the data, and then we show that data right away. Easy peasy. And we can quickly see an example of this as well. Let's say in the skills folder, we create a constant. We are going to call that skills.ts. And in here, we are going to extract. So we can say type skill equals, and let's say we have ID, name, description, category, created at, updated at. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some of them. So I'm going to say export const skills, and if you're using Antigravity, you will also see this IntelliSense. If you don't just pause and see and copy this. So here I'm having some skills that I've created, and each of them skills have an ID, name, description, whatever. And now that I've saved this, I'm going to go to my identifier page, or skill/identifier/page CSX. And here, when we have the identifier, we are going to use the skills to get the right skill and display that here. So I'm going to actually remove this for now, and I'm going to go ahead and here say const skill equals, and now I can import the skills. So I'm going to say skills, and I'm going to import this, and then I can find this using the ID and then just show the skill name here. Instead of showing the skill name here, I'm going to actually have, let's say, an article right here. And then inside this, we can have the heading and then the description, etc. So here we can have the heading. We can have all these P tags to just show that information, right? And I don't think anything else is needed to change here. So I'm going to just save this now. And if I go to my browser now and go to skills ABC, you don't see anything. But if I go to skills 1, or not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but actually just 1, you can see the skill 1, description, category, all of those things are coming here. If I go to skill 2, then you can see the skill 2, description 2, category 2. So we get the URL, we make the exact call, we find the particular item, and then we display that. That's how it's working. And you can see exactly the code here. So we take the identifier from the URL, we try to find the skill by using this identifier. So we are checking any skill that has the ID, which is exactly the same as the identifier, bring that here. So this is assigned to this skill variable, and then we are showing that skill variable right here. If we don't have the skill found, then we could essentially just say, okay, skill not found. So here we could also do a conditional rendering. So here we'll say, if the skill is there, then show all of this, otherwise say not found. So notice that here we have a question mark, we have a small bracket which has the content to render if we have the skill. Then we are saying here we have this colon, then if skill is not found, then render this. So if I go back to my browser now and type anything that is not there, like ABC, here you can see not found. So you can conditionally render if something is not found, or we also have other ways of doing this as well. Now let's move forward. We also have something in the UI called layouts, and layouts mean you can wrap components in a layout that has to be constant everywhere, which means that, for example, in our React application, you're going to notice that if I go to the home page, we have this header. If I go to the browse skills, we have this header. If I go to dashboard, we have the same header. So this header never goes away. It's always there. And that is because we are wrapping every single component inside this layout, which has the header, and this particular section, which is the light gray area, this is something dynamic. The header always stay there. If we look at this in terms of actual code, you're going to notice something as well. Here we have the body, inside which we have two things. We have this nav bar, and then we also have this main, right? This main is dynamic. This keeps changing, or this has the content being changed inside here. So here we have this container, MX auto, blah, blah, blah. And this nav bar always stay here. You will notice when I change the pages, you will see some changes happening here, but not on the nav bar. So let's have a look. If I go here, go to browse skills, you see that the main got changed, but the nav bar did not change. If I go again to a different page like dashboard, you see that there was no change in this div. So this header never changes. The content changes, the main or the dashboard, depending on where you're going, that changes. If I go even to a nested page like a skill detail, you can see that the nav bar never changes, the content changes. It's even the same for if I just go and go log out. If I log out, you can see still right now I'm here. If I go to sign up, you can see the nav bar, this particular div never changes. So notice when I'm going back and forth, you can see that the highlighted div I have never changes. There's no flashing on top of it, but this particular content always changes. In the case of login and sign up, even this div does not change. If I open this and open this, even this card doesn't change, the card's body changes. So notice if I go to sign up, you can see that the highlighted part, this one doesn't change, but the one inside here changes whenever I go from sign in to sign up to sign in to sign up. So this part is changing, but this is wrapped in a layout for login and sign up. And I'm going to show you how that works, so not to make it too complicated. So how do we work with layouts? If you look at the code here, if our HTML and body have something that's right here as header and footer, or whatever that could be, as long as we have something wrapping this children, this will always stay the same. So in our root layout, the top level layout, whatever we put here will be available on all the pages. In our case, this header is the one that we are putting right here. So this is available on all pages regardless of where you go. This children right here, Next.js, treats these as routes. So whenever we go from one page to another, in our case, this children will be the dynamic content that we have in this sort of light gray area. So we can have it just like this. So let's actually try to do something. And we have not installed Tailwind CSS in our project. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go and install DaisyUI. We already have Tailwind CSS, but we have to install DaisyUI. So when you go to daisyui.com, you go to how to use, and inside here, you're going to go ahead and see frameworks. So if you scroll a bit down, you're going to see Next.js right here. If you go here, you're going to see that first we need to create an app. We already did that. Now we have to just install this, and then we need to configure this, and then we need to do this. So let's do it step by step. So I'm going to copy this now. I'm going to go to my code now and open the terminal. So my server is running already here. I'm going to open a new tab just like this. And then I can go ahead and paste this. The next step that it says is add Tailwind CSS and DaisyUI. So here you can see that we have this postcss.config.mjs. So that needs to have this. I believe this is already the case. So if I go back to my code now, the packages are installed. And if I go to the postcss config.mjs, here you can see exactly the same thing. So we have this config, plugins, Tailwind post CSS. I'm still going to remove all of them and then try to paste. And this is exactly the same thing. One thing that's added is just this type. So I'm going to save this now. And in the browser, it says in my global CSS, I need to put this plugin DaisyUI. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to app/global CSS right here. And just below Tailwind CSS, I can add this like this. Now, if I'm using TurboPack, which I am right now, so I'm going to be using this command to set the browser's list to use the latest browser configurations. So here, I'm going to open this terminal, and here I'm going to paste it. What this does is that it says my Next.js application is supposed to work on the latest browsers, so not the older ones. So I'm just setting this as it is now. Now I have my DaisyUI configured. I'm going to actually stop the server. And one thing that you could also do to remove any cache is do rm and that .next. So it removes any cached state. So I'm going to do rm-r here. And then what I'm going to do is run npm run dev again. And now this is running on localhost 3000. And here you can already see it says DaisyUI 5.5. So DaisyUI is working now. If I go to my browser and to my app, you can see that there are some changes, subtle changes. So we have some background configuration right here. But I want to use this navbar or a navbar like this in my app. So I'm going to go to DaisyUI, scroll a bit down, and here you'll see somewhere it says navbar, which is right here. And I'm going to pick the basic one. So this is the navbar with title only. And since we are using Next.js or React, we are going to copy the JSX. So I'm going to copy this now, go to my code, and I'm going to put that in the layout. So let me close all of these files. And now I'm going to go to app/layout.tsx. And in the layout, if I go here, you can see the children right here, right? This is not wrapped inside a main or something else, unlike our slides. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to go ahead and add this navbar right here, just like this. So I'm not creating a header component so far. I will create later on, but I'm just putting the navbar here. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this inside a main, and that's pretty much it. Now I'm going to save this, and if I go to my browser, my app, you can see already we have this header component, or the navbar is right here. You can see also this animation that's happening that's really subtle, and if I click the button, you can see all the styles as well, which is exactly the same as this one. So that means that our DaisyUI is working fine. Now you'll notice something here, and that is that we have a navbar, but the content right here, which is in this dark black background, does not really expand all through the page. However, in here, when you go to a particular page, for example, login, sign up, you'll see that the background actually expands throughout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add some CSS, because who does not love CSS? I would assume a lot of you. So what I'm going to do is just add one class here, if I remember correctly. So it should be something like min h screen. And if I save this now, go to the browser, and you can see now this whole thing essentially takes all the space. So this is exactly what we wanted. So now I could go to skill 1, and you can see that this is coming in pretty nicely. I could go to the home page, which should be, if I just go like this, so you can see the default page as well, but the default page also has the header as well. And now I could also go to the skills page here, and you can see this is the skills page. I could also go to the about page. I could also go to the login page. So every page that I go to has this thing already there, because this is being used in the layout. And you can exactly see the same thing here as well. This is the navbar. This is the main right here. And inside the main, we have the children, which means I'm talking about exactly this part. So this children is the page content, is the route that we are in, and everything else remains the same. This div always remains there, this main always remains there, but the children's, they change. So here you'll see if I go from one page to another, let's say if I go to register, what should change essentially is just the part. But since we are navigating by changing the URL in the address bar and hitting enter, the whole page is being refreshed. So what we need to do is we are going to add some links in the nav bar. So let's go and try to add some links. So what I'm going to do now is I'm essentially going to create a components folder inside app. So let's say components. And inside here, I'm going to go ahead and say a new file, and I'm going to call this header.tsx. Inside the header, we are going to use this navbar. So I'm going to cut from here. I'm going to say export default header, and then here I'm going to paste it, but I'm going to paste it as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and use the header component, and we are going to import the header. And to do, you can click here and also go to the bulb and say import from components header. And now you can see the components header are there. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this as well. If I go to the browser, you can see the application works as it was before, even though we have a different set of components. And if you're using the React Chrome extension, you can click inspect here, go here and go to components. And here you can see the whole layout. So you can see all the React components, which might seem a bit crazy what Next.js does. But here you can see that we have this root layout. We have this header component right here, and then we could have other pages, etc. But essentially we have the header component here, and then we have the children. So now in here, I'm also going to add some links here. So first of all, I'm going to add a div with the class name flex. So we have a gap in between, and then I'm going to go ahead with this notion. So I'm going to go with whatever this is providing, but I wanted it to be a bit simple. So I'm going to add just a UL with allies. So here we have item 1, item 2. Instead of item 1, I'm going to actually call this skills. And here I'm going to call this one about. And then I also want the login and register as well. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and add login and register. Now, if I save this and go back to the browser, you can see all these links here. And if I close this, you can see that we have a gap in between. I can go to all these links. So register, so skills, about, login, register don't work. So I have to put the right links here. So this should be /skills /about, and this one login and register. I'm going to save this now. Go back to the browser, and now you'll also see that if I go to different pages like skills, about, login, register, you'll see here that this reload button sort of flashes or reloads, and the tab as well here. So if I change this, you can see that there is a loading happening everywhere. That is because we are using the native anchor tag, which basically takes us to that page, but it reloads the whole application. Now, like React applications, we also have to have Next.js applications, also a single page app. So we should not be going to different routes and loading everything, because that means if you go to a particular route like this, you are loading the whole HTML again, you're loading the whole JavaScript again. Everything happens from scratch every single route, which is not really effective, because if I have my header right here and if I go to other page, why should I reload this header component? That doesn't really make sense. Or why should I reload the whole CSS files again and apply the CSS again? Why should I reload the JavaScript again that has already been applied? So it doesn't make sense to reload the whole pages when you go to other routes. And in order to fix that, what we use is the link component instead of this anchor tag, and that is provided by Next.js out of the box. So I'm gonna replace this anchor tag with link here, and you can see this comes from next link. So I'm gonna show you right here, and then I can just replace all these components with the link tag, just like this. And now if I save this, go back to the browser, now you're gonna see that when I go to different pages, there will be no reloading happening. So if I go to skills, you can see about, you can see login, register, nothing is reloaded, just the page's content gets changed. And that is exactly what we wanted. If I right click here, go to inspect, now we can see that same behavior. So if I look at here in the main, you will see just this content being changed. So if I go to, for example, about, you can see that the main flashes because main only has this, but this div, the nav bar, never gets reloaded or refreshed. So you can see that that one or this exact one never is flashed. It always stays there. And that is exactly the beauty of Next.js routing. Great, let's move forward now. Now we are going to talk about the different rendering strategies. And this is a topic that to be honest, not a lot of Next.js developers understand, especially the beginners. And I have a complete video that you can see right here that talks about the different rendering methods like client-side rendering, server-side rendering, and also static site generation, etc. If you look at the normal process right here, whenever your browser requests an app, especially in the case of a simple React application, what usually happens is that the server sends back the HTML and then the browser renders all of it. And this can be demonstrated right here. When the browser requests a particular HTML, it essentially goes to the server sends back the HTML, and here on the browser you get the client-side rendering triggering. On the other hand, you do have the possibility that when the browser requests the server the particular HTML, the server renders it on the server side and sends back the parsed HTML, which means that the browser will see the rendered HTML already, and then the client-side rendering may trigger or may not trigger. That's a different question based on what kind of rendering are we talking about. So the rendering spectrum has the static site generation. These are going to be the routes which are generated on build time, which means when you run next build or npm run build, the Next.js application builds for production, and that is exactly the time when they will be rendered, and then the rendered HTML would be generated. This is super fast, this is super cheap, and a really good example of this would be the landing page. So the landing page never changes, or the landing page does not change after I've deployed the Next.js application, right? So it doesn't matter if 1,000 users are using or 2,000 or 20,000, the landing page will never change dynamically unless and until I go and I change the code or the HTML of it and then rebuild and then redeploy. A similar example would be from my application here, which is codewithsn.dev, where I have my courses and books and whatnot. Here, the about page is something that's never going to change unless I go and change the content of it in the code itself and rebuild. So since this is going to be only changing on build time, that is going to be a statically generated page. So let's go to our application and see which pages are statically generated and which are not. So by default, if you have followed the tutorial so far, created these folders and files, you're going to see that when you run npm run build, which essentially would run next build for us, you're going to see that it builds the application and it shows you how many pages are static and how many of them are dynamic. Here you see that there's a default not found page, the about page, login, register skills, and then the skills/identifier. You'll notice this O and F here. The O stands for static, which means that all of these pages are static. They are generated when the Next.js build runs, and then this whole page is a function or it's dynamic. So this is server rendered on demand. Why is this function sort of server-side rendered? Because we don't really know which skill the user would click. So we cannot know it on the build time. When we are building the application, there's no user using the application being built. So we cannot say which links the user is clicking, or there could be a million links. Are we supposed to build all those pages when we are building the application? No. And we could also have skills being dynamically created or removed or whatnot. So let's say I build my application today and I don't rebuild it for the next 3 months. What would happen in that case? So since during that 3 months, a lot of skills could be generated, removed, we cannot say what URLs are going to be there. Hence, we cannot really build all those static pages. So we have to leave this as a dynamic server-side rendered page, which means that whenever the user comes to this particular page, it's going to run the page or run the code of the page to identify which is the skill and then essentially return back the HTML. And we're going to look at that in just a bit. When you have built an application, you run the built application by running npm start. So there's a difference between these two commands. If you go to the package.json, you'll see we have scripts, and scripts have dev. This is what we run when we are building the application or developing the application. Then you have this build, which runs a production ready build, and then we have start, which runs this particular build, the production ready build. But you have to run the build first because you cannot start something that's not already there. So I'm going to run npm start, and now this is running the built version, which means that if I go and change my code, I will not see the changes there. For example, if I go to my app now, refresh, here you can see this is the skills page. But if I go to my code and if I go to the skills page CSX right here, and if I change this to say something, save this, go to my page, refresh this, you cannot see that change. So I have to rebuild and redeploy again or restart again, so to say. So I open my terminal, I now run npm run build and npm start. So this will rebuild the application, and we will see the changes now when we refresh the page. So now if I refresh the page, you can see something right here, which means that this is generated on build time. This is not dynamic. I cannot change this, right? So the skills page is static, the about page is static, the login registers are static. But if I want to go to a particular skill, then that is going to be dynamic. So let's do something quick. I'm going to go to the skills page to render those skills. So here, instead of rendering this, I'm going to actually change this to a section, and inside the section, I'm going to have this as a heading. So here I'm going to remove this actually, and I'm going to add a heading. I'm going to say skills, and then I want to render the skills as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and say const skills, and here I'm going to actually import the skills constant. So skills are going to be imported, and you can see now we are importing those. And here I'm now just going to go with what AI is suggesting. So we have a UL, we map over those skills, and we just render those. Now, instead of just rendering those, I also want to redirect to a particular skill. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take this out and add a link here. And in the link, I'm going to point to the particular skill using its ID and show the skill name here as well. So I'm going to save this now. I'm going to run npm run build and npm start. And now if I refresh, you can see we have these skills, skill 1 and skill 2. If I click skill 1, I go to skill 1 page and see the details. I click back, I go to skill 2. Now I see skill 2 details. So all of these are working. Again, this skills page is still static, and we can see that in the console here. So you can see the skills page is a static page. This, however, is still dynamic. And now we are going to see the difference between these two. When does the code run? So if I go and close this for now, and if I go to the skills page, and here I put a simple console log, I say console.log, I would say skills page, and here I'm also going to go ahead and just render skills as well, right? Something like this. Then I'm going to go to the dynamic page, which is inside identifier, and here I'm going to go here and say console.log, and here I'm going to say skills detail page, and here I'm going to say skill found, and then I'm going to show the skill as well. Now let's quickly save this now, and now let's see what happens. So first of all, I'm going to just build the application, and you'll see that when this is being built, I will see this skills static page having the console log, because this runs on build time. And I could go ahead and put this everywhere. Essentially, I could go ahead and do this in about, for example, right here. So let's quickly paste this, not that. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to auth, login, do it here as well, and then I'm going to go to register and do it here as well. So save this, and finally I'm also going to go to the components here, and I'm going to also put this here as well, console log header. Great. Now we're going to run npm run build and see which components or which pages are built on runtime. There we go. So if I scroll up, you can see a bunch of things. Here you can see we have header, then login page, then header, because when we are building these pages, the pages also have header. So first of all, the component is rendered, the header component. Then it tries to go to the login page to render it, but the login page also uses header. So we see header another time. Then we go to the register page, and the register page uses header. So we see header again. Then we go to about page, see the header again. Then I don't know why do we have this particular header here. Maybe it's because of the layout itself for 404. And then finally we have this skills page, which is static, and we see the header. Now with the skills page, you see all the skills being mentioned here, right? Now you don't really see this particular page, which is the skill detail page. So this console log that we put right here, this never ran during the build, because this is a dynamic component. This is not a static one. So you can see all these are generated. We have this particular one, which is dynamic right now. And now what we are going to do is we are going to just run npm start. When we run npm start, do you think when I go to the skills or about or login page, do we see the console log again? And the answer is exactly no. If I go to the home page, for example, right here, if I go to the register page, login page, about skills, I went to all of those pages, And if I go to my terminal, you can see no logs here whatsoever, which means nothing is running on the server side. None of these components got triggered, or the functions of those components got triggered. But as soon as I go to this one, which is of the identifier, which means if I go to a skills page, which is supposed to be dynamic, then I will see the log. So if I go here on skill 1, this is a dynamic component. So if I go to my terminal now, you can already see a log, skills detail page, skill found, and it shows us the exact skill. Now if I go to the second one, it will do this again. So if I go to skill 2, you can see it right here as well. If I go here, you can see skill detail page found, and skills is 2. So there are two realizations here. One, all the dynamic components get triggered when a user goes to that dynamic page. This is really important to understand, which also means that it's going to be super computation heavy if a lot of people start using your dynamic pages. So you have to build your projects in a way that you understand, okay, if this is a dynamic page, dynamic component, that really means that any user who tries to access this page is going to run a server-side component or a server-side render for this whole thing. And then when it's rendered on the server, we see the rendered component coming back. So if we go to the static component here, go to view page source, you're going to see here that we will have everything rendered. So we have this particular skills, skill 1, skill 2. And if I try to look at here, you can see right here, we have this skill 1 that you can see here. We have this skill 2, which is here. So this means this is not rendered on the client side. This is coming from the server side itself. The next thing that we can see, if I go to skill 1 and see its page source. So if I right click here, go to view page source, you're going to see that this one also comes back rendered from the server. That is exactly server-side rendering. So you render everything on the server and you send it back to the browser. And here you can see the rendered HTML is coming in. So you see here that we have skill 1, description 1, category 1, the dates are here. Everything that we see here is coming back from the server. Now, what would happen if that was not the case? And that's what we are going to talk later about. But in this case, we have covered the static side generation. By default, all components are statically generated. If there's nothing dynamic about that, so they are going to be statically generated. Then we have the server-side rendering. We already discussed about this. Any component usually, and you can take this as a notion or as a cheat code for how to identify if this is a server-side component, is if a component is async and this is awaiting parameters or awaiting something, then this is going to be a server-side rendered component. It is as easy as that. So if we have a wait in a page, which is server-side render, it's most likely is going to be a particularly server-side rendered component because there is something dynamic about that. And now we are going to talk about the third one, which is incremental static regeneration. So these are going to be the pages who are still the same as the static side generation, which means that there's nothing dynamic about them for a certain period. For example, let's say if I go to my course page, which was right here, if I go to courses, let's say I want to be able to show the count of my students, but it changes every 5 minutes or 15 minutes. And I want to show the latest count, but not making it a server-side rendered component, which means that let's say I have this particular page. If I make it dynamic, if I make it the server-side rendered, which means that if 10,000 users are accessing this page, that means that this page's code is running 10,000 times on the server. I don't want this component to be this heavy because nothing really changes here apart from the students count. So I want this to be statically generated. But let's say if I make this statically generated, that means that this only generates on the build time. So let's say if at 9 p.m. one night after having my dinner, I go here, run the next build, then it generates with these numbers. Now, if I don't update the site for the next 6 months, it will always show the same number because this generated on the build time. But with ISR or with incremental static regeneration, what's possible is that I can give this a configuration. I can say every 24 hours automatically regenerate this page, which means that I will build this application in the night at 9 p.m. and I will forget about it, and Next.js automatically after every 24 hours regenerate this whole page. I don't have to rebuild. I don't have to manually go build the application, deploy this on Vercel. That's not something that's effective or convenient. And this incremental static generation allows us exactly that. Now, this could be useful for something that's even, updated a bit faster. For example, let's say a news website or a blog article. There, you may want to show the number of likes, comments, but you don't really want to make this a server-side component. So you do a static site regeneration, but every 5 minutes. So after every 5 minutes, everybody sees the same numbers. So everybody sees the latest information. So maybe it's not important for you to have the real-time information, but it's more important for you to show the updated information after a certain time. That's where ISR is really, really good. Now, finally, we are looking at something called client-side regeneration, which is essentially just same as React. So you're not adding any server-side rendering. You're not statically generating something. You're looking at something pure client-side rendered, which means that it's not going to be on the server. It's going to be on the client. In this particular case, you just have running it on the browser. For example, something like a login form or a skill editor. This is something that you don't really need to render on the server. You can render it on the client side. And also because login form is not something that's static, it's something that's interactive. So your user is supposed to fill this form. Your user is supposed to interact with the form, see the validations and whatnot. So those kind of components will always be client-side components. Also, in certain situations, you don't want to server-side render some components. For example, in here, when you go to a particular skill, you don't want it to be server-side rendered for some reason. Maybe it's server heavy, or maybe you want to lazily do it. In that particular case, you're not going to have it like this. For example, if our skill page, which is the detail page, did not really do server-side rendering, or did not have this async await, that would mean we could do this on the client side. For example, let's try to actually remove this await from here, and let's also try to remove this from here. And that also means that we are not really using these params on the server side. What we are going to do is we are going to remove this identifier from here, and we are going to use a hook that's called use params. So if you go to the Next.js documentation for use params, you can see that use params is a client-side component hook that lets you read the route's dynamic parameters filled with the current URL. So here, if you just copy this and go to your code and put it right here, and here you can just click it, click the bulb, and click this import from next navigation. And now I can take out the params identifier. So here, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to just call this param identifier, and then we can essentially return this component. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just save this now, and I'm going to try to rebuild the application. So let's quickly stop the server, and then I can say npm run build, and let's see what happens. And there we go. Now I'm showing you a really good lesson of the client-side components. Any component that uses any hook or any interaction like click, submit for the forms, etc., cannot be a server-side component. And by default, all the components are server-side components. Now, there's a difference between server-side components versus server-side rendering. Server-side components are components which are rendered on the server side. Client-side components are never rendered on the server side, so to say. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to first remove this type. We don't really need it at the moment. And I have to make this component a client-side component. And you do that by going here and say use client as the AI is suggesting. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to rebuild the application. So let's try this now. npm run build, and now you can see it says compiled successfully. And now here you can see that this is saying this is server rendered on demand. However, you'll see that the component itself will still be used on the client side. So let's try this out now. And now I'm going to go ahead and start the server. So npm start here, and now I can refresh here, and you can see this still works. If I right click here and do a view page source, you're going to see something interesting, and that is we still have this whole HTML coming back from the server. And the reason for that is that for client-side rendering, it's not just enough that we mark a component as use client, but it's also important that we do something different when it comes to fetching the information. And I'm going to tell you why that is. When we mark a component as use client, the difference between that and not marking it is that any hooks that we want to have, any interaction that we want to have, has to have this use client marked. But regardless, apart from all the other events as well, if something can be done automatically on the server, it will happen. Now this code is pretty simple. We just use an array which is hard coded, we fetch it, we render it, so it's easy to do it on the server. But let's say if that's not the case, if I wanted to do this with, let's say, something that is front end related or state related in React. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say const here skills, and here set skills. So I'm going to use a use state right here, and let's quickly update that. And I'm going to make by default empty. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to also create another one for skill. So I'm going to say const skill and set skill right here. And I can say use state null by default. Actually, let's try to remove this set skill or set it to skills by default. I'm going to remove this part right here, but I'm going to take this guy out and I'm going to say use effect. And I'm now doing it inside the use effect itself. So let's quickly mark this as this here. The skill could be either a skill or null, and I have to import this from types. So you can just pause it and see the code. I'm gonna be a bit quick, and this skill actually comes from skills itself. So we don't have types, and this is not being exported. So let's quickly go to skills, and here I'm gonna export the type as well. So here, let's do export type skill, save this, go back to the identifier. And in here, now I can say this skill is either going to be a skill or null, right? And in this case, we are also going to put a guard around it. So we can say if we have the skill, then we set the skill, something like this. Okay. So what we need to do now is we are using the skill to render it. Otherwise we say not found. So let's see what happens now. And I'm showing you the code so you can take a screenshot or pause and try to replicate it. So this is the upper part. And if I go a bit down, this is the lower part. Now that we have this, let's try to rebuild again. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and stop this, clear npm run build, and this is compiling successfully. If I scroll a bit up, you can see that this is still considered as dynamic. If I go ahead and say npm start now, and we go to the browser, and if we refresh now, let's see what comes back from the source. So I'm going to quickly close these, right click, view page source. And in here, you can see that we do see something interesting, and that is here it says not found. So the skills are not really coming from the server. The skills are not rendered on the server because by the time the server code runs, it doesn't really run the use effect. The use effect is run on the browser. It's not run on the server. So that's why by default, when this code is running, it will go ahead, it will skip the use effect and will see, okay, what's the skill? Well, the skill by default is null, and that's why it will say not found. Now you could show here loading or something else, depending on if you really want to make this client-side component, then you would have to identify what you should show on the browser. In our case, this code is run first, use effect is not run, and use effect is run in the browser. We can in fact see that in the browser. So if I go to my application here, and I'm going to actually run this in the dev mode so we can see this working. And you can see also in the backend logs as well, the skill detail page skill found null. So it's not finding the skill because we are not really running the use effect on the backend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm run dev so we can see the code itself and put some breakpoints there. So now I'm going to go to my browser, refresh here, and you can see briefly it says not found, and then it shows actual skill because it loads it right away. So you can click inspect here, you can go to sources, here you can go to skill page csx, or here you can see it's skills/identifier page csx, and here you can put a breakpoint. If I put a breakpoint here by clicking the number, refresh here, you can see by default what comes back is not found. Then it tries to find the skill in the use effect. If I do a step over, now it found the skill, as you can see right here. Then it goes ahead, sets the skill just like we do in React, and then it would run the component again, and then it will re-render the component again, and this time we will see the skill. So now that we have the skill, it essentially renders this whole article, and then we see the content right here. So this is an example of client-side component on how you could convert a server-side component into a client-side component by just marking it as use client. This essentially removes all the use effect and hooks that would run on the server side. And the next thing that you would mark a rendered component on the client side, or you would want to render this part on the client side, would be to do this use effect thing, which will fetch the information or will do something on the client side, so it's not done on the server side. Great. So now that we have covered the rendering spectrum, let's actually look at the strategies. So by default, it's statically generated. We already covered this one. If the HTML is pretty simple, does nothing, then it's SSG. If we talk about ISR, all you need to do is to export this content. You just say revalidate and you give the value in seconds. So if you have a page that is revalidating, that means it's incrementally static generation or regeneration. When we talk about SSR, as long as we have a function that has async and it awaits for something, then it is going to be a server-side rendered. Or if it has a dynamic parameter and it's not statically running through props, then of course it's going to be SSR. Now we're looking into something that we already discussed, but I'm going to go over it a bit more, which is server component versus client component. By default, all the components are server components, which means that they run on the server. They do have direct database access, they do have async await support as well, and they don't have any hooks, so to say. So use state, use effect, use params. If you put any of that, that's going to have Next.js complain about it, and you have to convert that into a client-side component. The server-side components also don't have any browser APIs, window, local storage, and since they are rendered on the server, they don't have to be on the client side at all, which means that there's no JavaScript on the client side that needs to be there, so to say. As I mentioned, the components are server-side by default. So for example, if you had the skills page, which would go to the database and bring back the skills to show, that would mean that you could just use Prisma in your component or your code, use an await by making a database query, and then render it right away. So this server component, the skill grid, would essentially render on the server side, and it would give back the whole HTML. When we talk about the client-side components, it does run on the server, which means that it does run on the pre-render time. And a good example for that is this agent skill page, where the rendered component that comes back from the server is not found. That is built already on the server, then it runs on the client side as well. You make the server components a client-side component by using use client. It does support hooks, event listeners like click, form submit, all of those things, and can be used for interactivity. We already covered that. Now the client components may look like this. You may have a client component like a header, which shows authenticated or unauthenticated states and could show different things based on that. For example, if the user is authenticated, show the logout button, otherwise show the login button. And we do that already in our application right here. You can see this login and sign up page here. If I go to the login page, let's say I put my email in here, put the password in, hit sign in. Now you can see that here the UI changed. It's still the same nav bar, same links, but this section has changed because now it has a drop down. And if I click logout, you can see that we changed the buttons here. So that's exactly what's happening right here as well. And this is a client-side component because you know about the authentication when you're on the browser, not on the server side, because there's no user on the server side. Then we also have to understand this composition pattern where you have to push the use client down the tree. So your major HTML can render as it is. For example, in this example, we have this H1, which is a static content, but maybe your skills grid has some hooks, some interactivity like click handlers or other things as well. That means that this skills page does not have to be a client-side component. This can still be a server component, and your skills grid component can be a client-side component. So only the component which is having those interactions or hooks needs to be the use client. You don't have to make the whole page use client. So that's a bad example. And what I did essentially is a bad example in production for sure, but this was for explanatory reasons. All right, let's talk about server actions now. So the difference between server actions is that they're a bit different from the traditional approach of connecting client and the server. Usually what we do is that we make HTTP calls from our front end, our client, to a backend or the server, and then this happens via the HTTP protocol. So you send an HTTP call, the server goes to the database, brings back value, and then the server responds back and in terms of JSON or a text response to the client, and then the client, after receiving that response, shows that information. So from the client, in terms of code, we usually implement an HTTP call. Server actions, on the other hand, are type-safe mutations without even the HTTP call. So what usually happens is that, in short, or in an easy way to explain it, server actions are just functions. The kind of functions that live on the server, but your client code can directly call those functions. In our example, we are looking at a new function or a server action which will allow us to add some skills. So right now we only see some skills, but we are going to be able to add skills as well. So the way you create server actions is that you create a file, you usually create a folder called actions, and inside that you can have an action. So this is not a fixed sort of terminology or a fixed structure. You can basically place your actions anywhere, but the key for making a function, a server action, is this. You need to have this use server in place. You could have this on the file level. You can also have that on a function level as well. But a good practice is just to create an actions file where you have all your actions organized, and then you have these functions which are going to be server functions. Now you will notice that most of these functions are async functions, and we are going to be retrieving form data. Now you could pass anything here apart from the form data, like a previous state or user ID, all those kind of things. But what's important is the form data here. When you have the form data being passed here, you can extract information from that form data like this. For example, in our case, when we are to create a new skill, a skill has a name, a description, the category, and then the created ad and updated ad. Now these are the things that can be created programmatically. These three things are important. So what would happen is that in the form data, we'll have a name, we'll have a description, and we have a category. All these things should be there. If any one of them is missing, we are going to return back a message that says, please fill in all the fields. Now this message that we are returning here, you can consider this as a contract for this function. This function is supposed to return an object that has a message, or it would not return anything at all. So it can return a message, it may not return a message, but this is the contract, so to say. So if everything is okay, then we create a new skill. We generate the ID on our own. We add the name, description, and category from the form data, which we are now having in these three variables. So we basically put them in this new skill, and then we create these two things programmatically as well. After that's happening, we are calling a function to add a new skill. I'm going to show you where that is. Finally, we have this revalidate path and redirect. I'm going to tell about these as well as we go forward. So this is sort of the server action that we need to have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of this. So we have things step by step. So I'm going to copy this, go to my code, and in here, we're going to create a new file. I'm going to right click here on the app, say new file, and say action/skills.ts. Now this makes it possible to have a folder and this file inside. Now I can go here and paste the code. So you can notice that it says use server, it has this create skill, it retrieves a previous state, and the form data right here. So I'm going to save it for now. Now let's move forward with some things. When we want to use server action in forms, we are going to need something. For example, this mock data stored. So we already have this skills sort of array available. We do have this skill type as well that we discussed before, but we are going to change something. We are going to add a function called get skills and also a function called add skill to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this now, and I'm going to go to my code here, and inside the skills.ts, which is right here, I'm going to make sure I have these functions. So if you did not have them, you can put them now. Now what this does is that it essentially allows us to get the skills using a function, and then also add a skill using a function as well. So we can always do it in an immutable way, and make sure that this skills right here has a let here instead of const. So otherwise you wouldn't be able to obviously reassign the values. So now that we have this, I'm going to save this now, go back to here, and now let's discuss what the front end or the client side should look like. So in my client, I need this new page called skill page. So I'm going to go to my code base now, and inside here we have this skills slash, and we have this identifier here, but I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it create, and then inside that we'll have a page.tsx. So I'm going to say new file here. So I'm going to say here create/page.tsx, and now here we have the page.tsx. So from the slides, I'm going to just copy this, and of course you have access to all the code, so you can essentially see this, but I'm going to copy this quickly, go here and paste it. Now let's study what is happening right here. In the new skill page, we have a p tag, which shows a message. If we have an error, the error message is going to be shown here with a text red. We have a form which has 3 inputs, one for name, a text area for description, and an input for category. Then we also have a button, and in here it will be disabled if it's pending, and if it is pending, we are going to show a message that says creating, and then if it's not pending, then we'll just say create skill. So when we click this button, it's supposed to call an action because the form automatically has this form action being applied, and we are using this function from React called use action state. So what's happening right here is that I'm giving this use action state a couple of things. First, a create skill method. This create skill method essentially will be our action. The second thing I'm giving it is the initial state, which has an empty message. Once we have an error, the message of this state automatically is updated. Where is this updated? From the action itself. In the action, we are returning this message. So whatever we return from this function becomes the new state. So when I'm sending an object containing message, that means that when I'm looking at this particular chunk, this state already has this message applied to it, and that's why we'll show that if it exists for sure. Now, why is this really nice? Because you can see this whole form or the page is just under 30 lines of code. I don't have to maintain each input's sort of value anywhere with a use state. I don't have to have a handler for the submit function. All of that is gone basically, and this makes it super easy to just work with forms because every input's value automatically goes to the server action. So just by implementing this form and form action and all of this using the action state, we have the access of any message that is in the form, if it's error or not. We are looking at the form action itself that we can pass to the form, and then we also have the pending state. So with one single thing, we get a lot of benefits. So now let's actually try this out. I'm going to save this now. I'm going to go to my browser, and one thing that we do need to change, and I'm going to show you why we need to change it, because a lot of people get stuck there. I sometimes also get stuck there as well, and that is that when we update the skill or add a new skill, they don't show up here. I'm going to show you why that is. So we are on the skills page. What we are going to also do is to create on the skills page CSX, which is the list page, a button as well. So here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a link here that says skills create, and then we are saying create skill. So I'm going to save this now. If I go to the browser now, you can see this create skill button. If I click this now, you can see that we go to the skills create page, and in here I have all these forms. Now I could beautify this a bit, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. But here, if I say something random like this and do not provide a category, see what happens. If I click create skill, you can see that this gets reset and we say, please fill in all the fields. So as soon as your server action returns back an error, it automatically resets the form. And now we have an error that says, please fill in all the fields. And when we go to our action itself, you can see the same thing right here. It sends back, please fill in all the fields. Now you could have an error that is specific to a missing value. For example, you could say name is missing or description is missing. So you can make it more precise if you want it. I'm going to keep it simple for now. Now, when I put all the values here, let's see what happens. So if I say create skill now, you're going to see that we go to the skills page automatically, but we don't see anything here at all. This still shows the same. If I refresh the app now, what happens then? Well, it is still shows the same thing. And the reason for that is, and the mistake that I was doing while working on this, and you might also be doing, is that this page is actually not server-side rendered. This page is static, which means that unless anything changes at build time or when the server starts, when you run npm run dev, nothing would change. So how do we fix this issue, and how do we even identify this issue? Well, the mindset behind this should be, when you go to a particular page, do you see here anything that is dynamic, which means that could change, can come from runtime? In our case, we are using this function getSkills, which essentially returns back an array. But the reality is that when we call this function in the beginning, it sends us an array back. And then we don't have anything that tells our component, our page, that this is a server-side rendered thing. Because if you remember the server-side components or the server-side rendering, they usually have something called the async method. That is how you know something is going to change, and this is supposed to be a dynamic function. So what you could do is that you could just use async and await right here and save this. And if I go back to my application now, refresh now, and if I go to a page and add something, you're going to see that now things would change. But also you need to go to this function and make this async as well. So when you make this async, it's going to return a promise of skills or an array that contains all the skills, which means that now Next.js knows that this is going to be an async function, and that makes it possible to be dynamic. So if I go back to my browser now, or actually let's try to restart the server. So I'm quickly going to go here, and you may also want to frequently, when you're facing these issues, just remove the .next folder so there's nothing cached. And I'm going to use R here to remove it, and now you can run npm run dev again. Now if I go back to my browser and refresh now, this is a fresh start, so we only have 2 skills. Now I'm going to go to create skill here, and then I can add a bunch of things right here, and then when I say create skill here, you can see that it went to the page, and here we see the new value. Let's try something else as well. I'm going to add another one, so and if I hit create skill, you can see that it comes here with the new value. So anytime now I'm adding a new skill, we see this new value because it's now dynamically fetching the new skills. And this is usually where you are testing it in development mode with an array or a mock data, then this is a common error that you will face. But when you're actually calling the database, you would essentially not face this issue at all, or you might need even to fix it. Having that said, let's actually study the code now. So we already looked at the front end side of the things. For the create page, all it is essentially using the use action state that gives you a pending, all those things. Now let's try to see the pending button itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate a delay when it comes to retrieving responses. So let's say that I go to this add skill, but instead of just returning it, or instead of not doing anything at all, I'm going to just say this is an async function where I can simulate a delay. So here I'm going to say await new promise, and you can see Gemini already helping me with this, and I'm going to say this is going to take 3 seconds. This means that now when I go to my action which creates a skill, before this add skill I can put an await, which means that it's going to wait until this function returns back something or is finished. When we have an await here, which means that revalidate and redirect both are going to wait until this finishes. If I go inside here, this is going to wait until this promise finishes, then it will add the new skill to the array, and then basically console log. So let's try this out. I'm going to go to my browser, go to create skill, and then let's put something right here. And if I hit create skill, let's actually make something like this. And if I say create skill, you can see creating here for 3 seconds, and then it takes you to the particular page, and here you should see the information. However, we had an issue where it did not resolve, or it did not show the information. And the problem with that is that you may also want to just return something from here, or return just the skills, or here you can even return get skills. So let's try this out now. I'm going to actually try to restart my server. We're going to go to the browser, quickly refresh this, create a new skill, say 1, 2, 3, create the skill. It says creating, so we'll wait for that. Now you can see we got a new value, but just to test it out nicely even, I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to go to create skill again. Now we're going to pick some bigger numbers, something like this, create skill, creating. You can see every single time we get a new skill. Now let's also test these skills as well. So here you can see this particular skill. Here you can see other values as well. If I go to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, here it says not found. This is interesting. So we are using an ID, but it's not able to find that ID, which means that we messed up something with our skill identifier page CSX, which is this one. So this one is also not server-side rendered, which means that it is going to be working with these hard-coded arrays. So let's quickly make this an async function, and then instead of using the skills right here, we're going to actually use the awaited skills. So here we are going to say the skills are going to be used like this. So when we are using the skills, we quickly go ahead and we say const skills equals await, and here we say get skills, and then we don't need this use state at all. So we're going to remove use state, and then we are also going to remove these things as well. We don't really need them, as we can just use this on the server side. So I'm going to remove the use client from here, use effect from here as well, and then we can quickly go ahead and say const skill equals skills.find. So we are finding this, and then we are using this. So I'm going to pause it here so you can essentially see how are we doing this. We have the ID from the URL that we get, then we use this thing that is get skill, so it fetches the new information. Then we find the skill using its ID with the params identifier coming from the URL, and then we return the rendered object. So easy peasy. I'm going to restart the server so we can see this in action. So if I go ahead to my browser and if I refresh now, oh, I can see that the use params are not going to be valid here. Instead of that, we should be using the server side option, which looks like this. So we already discussed this when we were talking before. So you can take a look at that as well. Just save this, try to copy this as well. But essentially the params are passed from Next.js automatically, and we have the identifier here. So I'm going to see if the server looks good. Yes, it does. I'm going to quickly go to my browser, and I'm going to go to skills. And now let's add a new skill. So I'm going to say create a skill, add some values here, and create skill. And now you can see that we got this skill. Now if I click it, it still doesn't do it. Why is that? Let's see. And I can see we do have this issue with params identifier, and I do remember that we needed to await that actually. So const identifier should be actually await params identifier, and we can remove this here. And now it says params is a promise that must be wrapped within await, because this is not the right sort of syntax. So this should actually be something like this. So we await params and then we take out identifier from it. So now let's try this out. If I go to browser, refresh now, it doesn't work because we have to probably start from here, and now it just doesn't find it, and I am interested in why that is. If we look at the action that is here, we do have the date now string which we add to the new skill ID, then we push it, and then once we are here, let's also make sure we have async here. We're getting the skills, we're waiting for the identifier right here, but then also let's put a console log here to just see if we do have the identifier and also the skills here available. So I'm gonna put this now, hit enter a bunch of times so we can see new logs. And now if I go and refresh this, I want to see what happens. So here you can see we still see only 2 of the skills, which is a bit weird, because if I go to skills here, I can see all of them, and this could be because of caching issue. So I'm gonna quickly try this out to see a fresh one. So rm next clear and then running dev. So let's start with a fresh slate so we see if it works fine. So if I'm refreshing now, you can see we got skill 1, skill 2. Now if I go to create a skill, let's add something like this, create a skill, and now you can see we have a new one. If I click this now, I can see all the data. So that was indeed a caching issue, and you are probably going to get into these quite a lot while you're developing, so be aware. Now I can go to my skills and create a new skill. This time let's use some alphabets, create a skill, and now you can see that we got the last one as well. And now if I click this, I can still see all the values. So this works now flawlessly, and you can see that it's super fast because a lot of these things are cached. For example, when you go to skill 1 the first time, it may take a bit more time than when you go to it the second time. So that's how we implement the server actions. I hope you understood some things. You also learned probably some things from the debugging as well. Now let's quickly have a look at the API routes. How do we essentially go there? So an API route example looks like this. Usually what we have is inside the API folder, any particular route, which is, for example, in this case, auth login and a route.ts. Just like we have page tsx for the page, we have route ts for API routes. So what we are saying here is that this is the endpoint that we are going to hit. And then inside that you have either post, get, delete, patch. So the usual HTTP methods as the function names, and Next.js automatically creates the particular route endpoint with the particular method. And you need 2 things for this. You need the next request and next response. For example, Next.js automatically passes the HTTP request to you in this function. From here, you can extract the JSON information, for example, email and password right here. And then you can also send a response back using Next.js response, just like this. So if you go down here, you can see we can do next response.json. And in here, we essentially can go ahead and just return this message. So let's try to create a particular route ourselves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this, and then we'll go ahead and do something from it. So here I can go ahead with creating an API folder. So I'm going to just do a new file here. I'm going to name the folder API slash here, let's say login slash route.ts. In this particular case, I'm going to quickly go ahead and remove this Prisma from here, remove everything except a simple thing. So I'm going to also remove the function down below. And now what I could do is, when we have this email and password coming in from the request, I'm going to essentially look at that. And if the user is what I want to be, then we essentially send a success, otherwise we don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put here a condition: if the email is admin and password is admin, let's go with this, then I can say, okay, this is invalid credentials, otherwise I'm gonna send login successful, mock ID, and that's pretty much it. I don't need to do all of this at all. So notice this code, take a screenshot, pause, and then implement exactly the same thing. So in short, we essentially have a post API endpoint, which should be in API/login. And what I'm doing right here is I'm passing information here, which is email and password. If it doesn't match the information that we have here as condition, it will throw an error. Otherwise, it's going to go ahead with sending a response back. So now that we have this API route actually implemented, let's actually go to the browser and try a call from just our console. So I'm going to go to my browser here, and I'm going to right click and inspect. And in here, I'm going to go to console and just clear it. And now let's go to the official documentation of fetch, because I'm trying it on console. So here we have this function that essentially makes a get call. So I'm going to copy this, go to my console, paste it here. So here you can see that we have a get data function, which essentially has this URL, and then we have the responses here. I'm going to go a bit down because here is the post example. So what I'm going to do is copy this, go to my code, and in here, I'm going to essentially change this URL. So first of all, we should have the URL that says localhost, and this should be HTTP 3000/API/login. So this is our route. Then I'm going to replace this response content from here. So just doing this. And in here, we should have fetch set to URL like this. Then the next thing that we have here is this object that has the method post, and in here we can have a body which has the email and password. So here I'm going to say email admin and password set to wrong, something like this, right? So now if I hit enter, it seems fine. So I'm going to clear this and then say get data, and let's have a look at the network tab as well. So what I'm going to do is hit enter now. There's a promise. You can see that there was an issue. We got a 500 error. So that means there's some issue with our code base. So if I go back to my server here, let's see what happened. Here it says I'm awaiting, and this object is not a valid JSON, which basically means that I'm trying to do a fetch call, but I'm not really using the right header. So it doesn't really know it has to send back the right information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially add headers. And if I'm not wrong, I can use accept application /JSON and also content type application /JSON, and fixing this. And let's try this out again. So now if I try to do the same get data, let's see what happens. We still get a 500. That's interesting. Okay, I think I understand what the issue is with this object. And if I go back to the function, what I needed to do was to JSON.stringify this guy, and this will let you know how easy today web development has become. Otherwise we would have to handle all these things. So I'll hit enter here. Let's try to call this function get data, and this time you get the right response. You can see response says 401, and you also see that it says unauthorized. If I go to the network tab here, you should be able to see that here we have this login call. If I click this, bring this a bit up, here you can see that we get the JSON that says invalid credentials. And if I go to headers here, you can see 401 unauthorized. Now, what if we try to do the positive one, which is admin. So if I say here that this is admin, and then if I say get data, you're going to see that this time we don't have an error. If I go to network tab here, we should be able to see that there should be one request that does well, and here you can see it fulfilled, and there is no JSON response sent back, which is a bit interesting. So here, if it's not admin, that we have this thing right here. Otherwise it should show this, but let's see. So this was API login successful, and we sent back a response back. So I'm going to try and reload this another time. Quickly go ahead and play here. And if I say this is the get data function, so this is the URL, we have a post right here. We're sending this information with accept application JSON and content type application JSON. If we have the response not okay, then we have a problem and we throw a new error. Otherwise, we just log the result as well. So let's try this out now. So I'm going to say this is my function, clear this and do get data. And now let's see what happens. So the promise here says it is filled or fulfilled. If I go to info here, I can see this as well. So the log was not really showing up. Now I can see the login successful, user, ID1, name admin, and I can go to the network tab here as well, and I can see the 200 status. If I click this, go to preview, here I can see the response as well. So this is the raw response that came in. This is a more formatted response. So now we have an idea of an API route that actually can send response. We could implement just a front end for this as well to test out, but I think you can look at it yourself or when we'll actually do the final application. All right, before moving to the next topic, which is error handling and loading, I wanted to quickly announce something important, and that is my fourth book, Zero to Website, is out. Now I know you're a React developer and you might already be experienced, but if you know someone who is a beginner and wants to learn web development with an AI platform that not only gives you the answers so you don't really learn, but actually teaches you by making you think, that's going to be the Zero to Website. So if you go to zero2website.com, you can see the platform in action. I'm going to quickly sign out and show you how this looks like. So this is the AI platform where you essentially go, you have a lot of challenges that you can attempt after learning from the book. And in each challenge, you can get AI hints. And when you get the AI hints, it won't ever give you the right answer it would essentially lead you towards the right answer by making you think like, what happens if you do this? What happens if you do that? And I also wanted to share that we have a wall of legends, which is for those people, those 100 people who are going to join the platform in the first place. And while the AI platform is free for developers to try out, also free for the people who are going to buy the book on LeanPub, but I'm actually giving away the $49 package, unlimited AI hints, unlimited projects, and more. You can essentially go to this blog post, follow the instructions, and get the $49 package for free and join the first 100 founders for this project. Having said that, let's actually get into the error handling. So you would use error handling in different cases. One example was essentially going to the create skill, and in here, when we submitted, we saw this error coming in, and this is coming from the server. So this is one example of error handling where you use a form action and the server sends back a message, and we can quickly check it here. This is the form that we submit, and we call this action called create skill, which is inside this file, inside the folder actions/skills. In here, whenever we don't have a name or a description or a category, from this server action we return back an object containing a message. If we return back a message, this essentially shows in the UI right here because we have this logic mentioned here. If we have state.message, then we essentially show that. Otherwise, while we're submitting, we change the text. So we have sort of a loading state right here with the message. But we are now going one level above and seeing what happens if something crashes on the application itself. What do we do then? But before doing anything, I really wanted to change the UI of the application just by adding some CSS because my eyes are hurting now, and you can see that this looks like absolutely terrible. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and change some things. So let's start with this fixing the skills page. So I'm quickly going to go to the code editor, and I'm going to go to skills/page tsx. In here we have this section. I'm going to quickly go ahead and say class name. I'm going to say p4 flex column gap 4, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to style this link a bit, so we should already have this a bit nicer, as you can see here. I'm also going to go ahead and do a simple max width MD and MX auto, so this is centered like this, and then I can quickly go ahead and style this guy. So I can say class name here, and then I can say px 1.5 py, actually py 1.5, and px should be 2, and then rounded MD, and then border. Actually, why am I doing all of this? I can just do btn primary. I forgot we have DaisyUI. So here we have the button right here, but I'm going to actually make it self end. So this goes towards the end like this. So we have now the skills, and we do have this right here as well. And I'm also going to go here and give the class name menu right here. So let's save this. And here you can see we have now 2 menu items. So I'm going to say skill 1, it goes to the skill 1. So what I'm going to do here is quickly go to the create skill here, and then also apply some form styles. So I'm going to go to create page CSX, and in here I'm also going to go ahead and give this the class name. So class name form flex call gap 4. I'm going to quickly do it like this, and then I'm also going to give this p4 as well, and then we can see it right here. Now we can add some placeholders. So I can say placeholder skill name. This one is going to have skill description, and this one is going to have skill category. So now we have at least better looking inputs, and now I can create this skill. So I'm quickly gonna go ahead and give this a class name button primary, and there we go. We can also go ahead and give this form essentially the same classes as max width. So max width MD and MX auto. So this is a bit centered. So now if I go back, come here again, there is some consistency right here. And finally, when we click a skill, I can do the same thing. So it should be skills/identifier/page tsx. So here we're gonna give this article quickly the class name max width MD MX auto p4 flex auto and gap 4, and it should be flex call actually. And now we have the skill description category, etc. So I can go back, come here, or go to the create skill. Great. Now let's have a look at error boundaries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when there is a crash within an application. So for example, let's say we had this creation skill, And if I go to page.tsx inside create here, this calls an action, which is create skill, right? If I go there and in the creation, when we return a message, let's say we had something in here that also checks, let's say, for validating the name, the description, and the category. Let's say we check if the description is 100 characters or not, let's say. Or we try to do something that crashes, but it's not part of the message, for example. I mean to say that we don't have control of what happens and it could throw an error. So that's a hypothetical situation I'm creating in which instead of sending the message, we actually have a crashing code. So here, let's say we had a crash. We had a situation where it said throw new error, something went wrong for any weird reason, for any hypothetical reason. So instead of just sending a message, we crashed our application. If we do this by default, let's see what happens. So I go to the create next app and let's say I submit this button. As soon as I do this, you can see the whole application crashed. If I click outside here, because this is in the dev environment only, so the production applications don't see this thing, but what they see is this thing. So imagine your users seeing this application error, a server-side exception occurred while loading and then digest 9300039. It looks like a palindrome, but not helpful for the users at all. So what if we actually had a better way of showing those errors? That would be implemented using the error boundary. So I can quickly go to the slides and show you this is how we implement the error boundary. So what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to copy paste all of this code, and then I'm going to go inside the folder because I'm putting the error boundary right now within the create page context or scope. So here I'm going to go ahead and say error.tsx, and the error spelling is wrong. So this is the file, and then this is what we have. In here, I'm essentially returning a function which is called error. The file name has to be exactly error.tsx, and Next.js by default sends the error here in this variable, the actual error, and we can extract out the message of the error by doing error.message. So we have a simple page in which we have a div, a heading, a p tag, and in here we also have this button that says try again. Now notice that apart from the error, Next.js automatically gives us this thing called reset, which retries the page or refreshes or removes this error boundary thing that is being shown to the user to show something else or what was the previous page. So if we implement this now, let's see what happens. Just by creating this file, putting this content here, if I go back to my app now, do create skill, you can see that instead of that crash which removed the header and everything else, we essentially now have this being shown. Now it shows something went wrong 2 times, but let's actually change that. So let's say if our skills function, instead of throwing this, said something like external API XYZ not available, something like this, right? So if our application depended on XYZ API or server and it's not available for some reason, it's crashing like Cloudflare did a couple of months ago, then this is the error we should be showing. So if I refresh now, create skill, you can see here something went wrong, external API XYZ not available. I could do try again, and then I could try this thing again. So that is essentially nice. Now there's a problem with this, and that is this only tackles the errors within the create page route, which means that if something crashes on the skills page, well, that is not handled. So let's try that. I'm going to remove this error from here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to skills, and when we load the skills, I'm going to put the error there. So if I go to skills/page tsx, which is this one, and just go ahead and put an error in here, or I could put that in get skills, for example. So in here, if I go ahead and put it like this, then we have a problem. So if I go here, you can see now it crashes. If I refresh, it crashes. If I click outside, yeah, the weird error is back. So now the question becomes, does it make sense to actually go ahead and put an error file in every single page? For example, inside create, inside identifier, inside the skill page tsx, and then also maybe inside login, maybe inside about, auth. Like, do I have to do for all the pages? Well, the answer is no, because we have a concept of global error, and we can create that file as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to leave this error here, but now I'm going to go to the global level, which is the app folder right here. And inside here, I'm going to create a new file called global-error.tsx. And of course, all of this information can be found on the website or on Next.js documentation. We have this whole section that is handling expected errors, which means that when you think there's going to be an error, how can you essentially intercept them? So in here, you can see this global errors section, which essentially talks about exactly the same thing. So it has to be global error.tsx, and you can call this global error. And one unique thing about global error versus normal error file is that it has to have the HTML and body tags. Now, funny enough, even if you don't put them and run this in Chrome, it wouldn't matter, because Chrome by default, if you just have an index.html or any HTML file and just have these HTML tags, Chrome automatically wraps them around these. So you wouldn't even notice if you forget to put these, but there may be browsers that are not as nice, so they would essentially crash. So your global errors should have HTML and body. So in here, if I just copy paste this, and this is exactly what we have in the slides as well. So if I copy it from here or there, we'll essentially arrive at the same result. So I'm going to paste it now, and I'm going to save this. Now, if I go back to my app here and refresh, you should be able to see that this dev thing, if I remove this, this is what we see. Something went wrong. So this is what the user would see. The user will never see this particular section. This is just for development environment. But the user, instead of seeing that center text application error and 9300039, we now have something better. So you could essentially show here 404 not found, or looks like you're lost. You might want to go to some other page. For example, if I go to, I don't know, github.com/something that doesn't really exist, what do they have? They have something like this. So maybe you want to show something like this. It's up to you. So having said that, this is essentially how you would handle global errors, and you can also handle local errors, as in on a single page or the context of a particular route, so to say. And yeah, you can customize as much as you want. Now we're going to look into something different. We're going to essentially remove this error from here. It doesn't make sense to have that anymore. And I'm going to also remove that from the action itself. So the create skill action, where we had the error. Now I want to show you something that's called not found. So what happens if I try to go to a skill that doesn't exist? For example, this one surely does exist, but if I change the URL to 22, maybe that one doesn't exist. And here we see not found, but it's not nice, and we're handling it in a really different way. The right way of doing this would be essentially to create a not found file, which is supported by Next.js by default. If I go to the browser and the documentation, you can see here is the not found. So what you do first is you have to have a not found.tsx that exports the content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially go to the skills page here, and in here I'm going to go to the identifier scope, because when we go to a particular skill, this is the page we come to. That's why it makes sense to have the not found file just besides it. It's really important. Just like we have the files besides, for example, this page tsx, we had the error. Similarly, we have the not found file right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paste it, but I'm going to change this into a section, and I'm going to also go ahead and change this to having a heading just like this, and then maybe a link here that says, I don't know, go to home, and just add an href here that just takes us to the home page just like this. And I can also give this a class name of button outline, and maybe a margin top of 4. Now that we have this, let's see how we can use it. For example, if someone tries to go to a particular page that doesn't exist, for example, a skill that is 22, instead of showing this not found, they should be showing the not found file, which is exactly this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the page tsx and see what do we have here. Now in here, what we try to do is that we use this get skills method. With this, we get a particular identifier, or we get a particular skill back. And if the skill is not found, then we return this. So I'm going to remove this logic from here, and I'm going to also remove this ternary from here as well. Now we're going to bring back the article right here and remove this bracket. So what we are doing here is that we are going to now still have all of this. I'm going to remove the console log, but once we try to find the skill, after that, I'm going to say, if we don't have a skill, then I need to do something and do a return from here. So if we don't have a skill, what do? How do we actually render this not found page? Well, in order to do that, we just need to call a function called not found from next navigation. So you click it, you can see that this is imported from next navigation, and we call it just like this. When you call not found from any of your server actions or your server functions, so to say, you will automatically render not found. So if I go back to my browser, you can see that here we have 404 page not found, go to home. Click it and you go to home, right? So this is our component. If I go back to the browser, I can essentially go ahead and add some classes to make it a bit nicer. Maybe do p4, max width md, and mx auto, and I could see it like this. Now I could also do text center. Maybe I would say border primary, and rounded MD. So it looks something like this. However, I don't really like the fact that we do have a padding, but we don't have a margin. So here I'm gonna say my is gonna be 4. And now we have a centered page with some border. It's not as beautiful, I know, but it's better than before. So if I click this, go to home, you can see it goes to home. Now it doesn't matter what we try to do. If we try to click a right skill, which means skill 1, it finds it, skill 2, it finds it. But when we go to any skill that is not there at all, it's going to essentially take us to this page, and I can just say go to home. Now, just like the error boundary, the not found can also be scoped locally, or it can also bubble up. So what would happen is that there's a really nice diagram right here. Here you can see that the error boundary by default is on the page. So if there's an error on the page, it essentially goes to the closest error boundary. If it doesn't catch it there, then it goes to the error boundary above, and the not found is exactly the same. Here you can see the same thing and the same approach as well. So it would go up and see which one it finds. Great. Now that we have looked at the not found, let's actually look at loading state, because what happens when we go to skills and we click a skill that takes 5 seconds to load? Well, the default user experience is that you click and then you don't see any change. It takes 5 seconds and then you go to the different page, because that's when the server returns everything back. But Next.js has a nicer way that essentially lets us see a loading state while the data is being loaded. So in order to do so, you use this loading.tsx alongside the component where you want to show the loading. So here what I'm going to do is I'm essentially, instead of copying this guy, I'm going to go ahead and add a loading in the identifier. So here I can quickly say loading.tsx, and in here I'm going to quickly go ahead and copy all of this and paste it here, and here I'm going to name it skill loading. And instead of this grid, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add a padding of 6, max width MD, MX auto, MY4, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use one of these cards. So I'm going to remove this key, cut this, and paste it here. And I want you to just pause and see this, and you will copy paste this, and then we'll take it from there. So now we have a loading function right here. Now I want to rename this temporarily so we don't really trigger this by default. Still we have HTML ready. So what I'm going to do now is that in the identifier, if I go here, I can essentially go to the get skill function, and I want to simulate some change here, and that is that it takes a lot of time to get the skills. Since this function is already async, what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to await a new promise that takes about, let's say, 3 seconds. So I'm going to say await new promise, and in here I'm going to have resolve, and I'm going to do a set timeout right here with 3 seconds, resolve null here. So now what would happen is that for getting the skills, it essentially would take this. But I think this would be the same case for the skills page and getting a particular skills. So what I'm going to do is if I go to my browser and if I go here and if I click skill 1, let's see what happens. So if I click here, you can see nothing is happening. And now 1, 2, 3. And now you can see we went to the page. So for the user, it's really bad because the user doesn't see that we have something happening in the background. If I click the other skill, you can see it takes about 3 seconds and then it goes to the other page. If I try to do this again, since this is a server component or a server-side rendered component, you can see every single time this takes 3 seconds. But the 3 seconds is not the problem. The problem is that the user doesn't see anything is changing. So when we introduce this loading state, you'll see what happens. So I'm gonna go here and just save this like this. And now if I go back and click this button, you'll see automatically we see a loading indicator. Can you realize like how cool this is compared to the really ugly experience that we had before? So you click it, it quickly shows you a loading screen, and as soon as the data is ready, it essentially shows the right details. So I really love the fact that we have this loading screen because it feels super nice. And you can implement the same thing for the skills page. For example, if I go to skills now, you can see that this is loading, taking a lot of time, and then it's showing that because the get skills function that we put the promise in is essentially the same for the list and for the detail. So what we can do is that we can now copy this thing right here, and this is going to show us some grids. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go ahead and go to the skills/loading TSX, and in here I can paste it like this. Now this imagines that we have a grid of skills, but you'll still see the loading indicator there. So if I go back to my application now and refresh now, you can see this grid loading, and then you'll see the skills. Now in our case, we have a list inside of a grid, but you get the idea. You can just change it to look like your end result. So here, if I click a skill, you can see the loader. If I go back, you can see that this is already cached. But if I go to a particular page, let's say I go to login, I come back to skill, it's still showing us this loader, and then essentially it goes to the result. Awesome. Great. The next thing I want to cover is essentially how we use database query or Prisma and how we will use that in our final application before we wrap up this video. So I'm going to quickly go through the concepts here, and then when we actually copy paste stuff and actually run the database integration, I think that's when you'll see it the most. So here we are going to use in our skill application that I showed you in the beginning, something called Prisma. And we're going to use PostgreSQL as the database. So you might have heard about MySQL, MongoDB, but PostgreSQL is one of the nicer databases as well. So how do we essentially start working with them? We first install the Prisma package, which is an ORM. So what happens is that you know JavaScript already, and you are supposed to work with database. So for database, you need to know database queries like select query, insert query, also aggregate queries, etc. So if you don't really want to learn those, Prisma is an ORM that allows you to do the same thing but with JavaScript. So you don't run raw SQL queries, but you essentially run with JavaScript. Furthermore, it also allows us to keep a schema that we can keep updating with migrations and whatnot. So what we do is we install the Prisma client, we install the adapter for Postgres, we install the Postgres package, we also install the types for Postgres, and we also of course install Prisma. Then we do npx prisma init, so we initiate our database. But in order to initiate the database, we essentially need sort of a schema. So this is the schema that tells our application what database tables do we have in our database. For example, what kind of items do we have in our database? So our system has a couple of things. We have a user, and then we have a skill, and that's pretty much it. For example, as I showed you in the beginning, we have an app that allows users to maintain their skills publicly or privately. So in here, we have a user that can use email password, would have a name, and would have an array of skills. Each user would have a created date as well, and would have a unique ID, which will be incremented automatically. So if there's the first user in the system, it would have an ID, then the next user would have another ID, and it would automatically increment from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and so on and so forth. Maybe it starts at 1. I can't remember. Same goes with the skills. Each skill has a name, has a description, has a content, which is the markdown content, and then we decide if we are going to make the skill public, so it's visible to everyone, or just private, so it's a boolean there. Then each skill is by a user. So a user creates a skill. Each skill created belongs to a particular user. So that's why we have this author ID, or you can call it user ID. And here is the relation. So every skill belongs to an author or a user. And how do we know which user it is? We essentially look at the author ID. So we look at the skill, the author ID, and we know, aha, this is the user that is basically owning this particular skill. So here you can see that we are creating or managing the relation from the skill to the author. And that's pretty much it. We are mapping the users and skills to the database sort of tables here. Then what we do is that we just use a simple file called prisma.ts. This is to make sure that if our Next.js application is going to multiple pages, from skills to login to other pages, and even if there are some server-side functions running, importing the Prisma file multiple times, we only create a single Prisma client. Otherwise, what usually ends up happening is that we have multiple Prisma clients connected to the database, which means multiple connections opened by the single application, by the same application to the database, which is unnecessary. This particular file makes sure that we initialize the client, the Prisma client that connects to the database only once, and we just then use it. Then we are using something called Docker. So when we are going to run the application locally in our machine, we are going to use the Postgres database locally within Docker. So we are going to spin up a database server. Then our Next.js application will connect to that database using a configuration of a user, password, and we will define what is the name of the database, which port it is running at, etc., etc. So this will ensure that we have a database running in our machine. We run it by using Docker Compose up. This is going to be called a Docker Compose YAML file. So we run it with Docker Compose up. Then we run our database migrations. So first up, we essentially set up our schema that I showed you just before. So here is the schema file that we are going to use. Then we are going to go ahead with this Docker Compose file, and then it's going to use the schema automatically when we run this particular command, and it basically creates all those tables inside the database. We are going to look at that. Then for the UI, we are using DaisyUI. So we just install the package. We make sure that we are setting this value for Turbo Pack since we are using Next.js. We update our styles file for these things. We essentially can then use all the Tailwind CSS plus DaisyUI classes. And then we have some instructions for what do we do when we go live on a database. So we have all this checklist that we are going to essentially look at, but let's actually start building the app now. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to go and stop my server, and we're going to commit what we have done so far. So let's quickly do a git add dot git commit -am. And here you can say chore initial commit, and then we have a clean slate to start with. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to actually go ahead and copy this whole thing. So what you can also do is that I'm going to share a link with you that is the agent skill manager reference files. This is private repository at the moment, but when I'll publish this video, of course, this will be public. So what you can do is you can essentially go to this Prisma folder, and inside here you can have this schema.prisma. So you're going to open it, and it looks essentially exactly the same as what I showed you in the slides. So you just copy it from here. Then you go here, and then what you can do is you can say npx prisma init. If I remember the command correctly, it should create the default files here. So you can see we have the Prisma folder here and a schema Prisma right here. Now what you're going to do is you're going to select all of it and just replace with it. Then you can also install the extension of Prisma. So you can essentially go to extensions here, and here you can say Prisma Insider build. Just trust and install, and this essentially gives you IntelliSense to see within your code editor. So here you can see all these highlighted nicely. Now that we have done this, I'm going to show you the commands to run. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to first create this lib prisma ts. So I'm going to quickly copy this, go to my code, and in here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to app, and in here I'm going to quickly go ahead, create a new folder, lib, and then I can say maybe prisma.ts, and this is now a folder which is not correct. So I'm going to move to trash, create a new folder, prisma.ts, and then paste the code here. So now you can see that we are missing these packages: Prisma client, Prisma adapter PG, all of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my slides, and in here we have the command that should be right here. So npm install Prisma, Prisma client, Prisma adapter PG and PG. So I'm going to go to my code editor, open up the terminal, and in here I'm going to run this. Then I'm going to install the types as well. So now that this is installed, I'm going to paste the next command to install the types. And now that we have the types as well, we are going to generate our Prisma client. So you need to run npx prisma generate, because that's what's failing right now. We don't have a Prisma client. So what this command does is that it goes ahead, it looks at your schema, like what kind of models do we have, which means what kind of database tables do we have. We have a skill table, we have a user table. Based on these, it essentially goes ahead and generates a client which has a bunch of functions that you can see. So here you'll find a lot of functions that you can see throughout this file, but you will find things like skills. So user.skills seem to be here. So you will find the skill schema, their query functions or properties, like how do you select skills, how do you create a skill. So all of them now have types that are created automatically for us based on the schema. So I'm going to just save this file now. And now we need to create the Docker Compose YAML. So I'm going to quickly do docker-compose.yml. And then what you can do is from the reference files, if you go to the top, you should be able to see the Docker file, but I see that it's not here. So I'm going to quickly copy paste, but you will be able to see it. And then I'm pasting it right here. So you can essentially copy paste from here. You can see that we have the database and the user right here, or the user and the password. Then we have the database name here as well. And then we also have the volume here as well, where we are saying skills PG data, which we are also mounting here as well. So just keep it like this, and we are able to run that in the terminal. Then once you have saved this, you can essentially run Docker Compose up, but I noticed that I need to change this to 5432. So they both have to be 5432. Once you have this, you can essentially go ahead and say Docker Compose up. And when you run this, it is going to first pull the image of Postgres from the internet, and then you should be able to see something like this: database system is ready to accept connections. So this is important. Then you can use something like this extension, PostgreSQL Explorer. And if I go to my extensions and if I show you the installed ones, it should be something around here. And I remember it being something from this one. So this is from K Kolkman, and you can essentially just use this to connect with a Postgres database. So now that we are running this on Docker locally, we can essentially go to this extension, hit plus. Here I can give the host name to localhost. Then the username would be exactly what we have here. So if I show you, the username is Postgres, the password is Postgres. So Postgres, and then 5432. And then here I can say standard collection. And in here you can see we have Postgres and skills DB. I already had created this before, but you can essentially create one, or you can just say show all database, doesn't really matter. So if I click this, and I can give this the name skills database, and now you can see we have the skills database. If I go here, go to skills DB, which is the database, go to public, and in here you can see we don't really have any data. But anytime you can just right click here, and then you can refresh items to see the latest items. Now that we have the database established, we have to start migration. So we already had the schema file, right? So if I go to Prisma, schema.prisma, here you can see that we have the schema file, which is supposed to generate the tables. So what I'm going to do is open the terminal again and open this new one. So you can just click plus here. And then what you can do is you can run npx prisma migrate dev. And here you can say name is init, which means that we are running our first migration and we are just initiating. So when you do this, it's going to run it. But the problem we have is this essentially expects us to have some environment variables we don't really have at the moment. So that's why it's going to localhost 51214. So if we go back to our reference files, you'll see that in here we have this Prisma config ts. So we're going to open this and we are going to copy this. Then we are going to go ahead in our files here, and in the Prisma config ts we are going to replace everything. I think it's exactly the same, but I'm just going to do it anyways. And then we need this database URL in our env. So I'm going to open my env here, and here you can see that we have this weird sort of whole string. So we don't want that. What we are going to do is that we are going to change this to 5432, and then here we're going to use skills underscore db, and in here you can see Prisma plus Postgres, and here localhost 5432. Now we could also add username and password here. So here we can say Postgres @localhost 5432. So I'm going to just save this, and I'm going to say the same thing, npx prisma migrate dev name init, and if I hit enter now, let's see what happens. Great. So here it says API query string parameter was not provided in the connection URL. I did not know that that was important. So maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially quickly copy this, and I'm going to replace just the first part here. I'm going to replace this and replace this as well. So here it looks something like this now. We have Prisma plus Postgres We have Postgres :Postgres at localhost 5432. I'm going to save this now and I'm going to run the command again to see what happens. Great. Now it says cannot reach the server at this URL. I don't know why do we have the same URL still. And I think the problem may be that we are using Prisma plus Postgres. So I'm going to keep this Postgres and then the rest of the things. And I don't think we really need this API key, to be honest. I'm going to save this now, try this once more, and let's see what happens. There we go. So we do have the migration working now. So we have the init migration here, and you'll also see in here that in Prisma, we have this migrations, and in here, you can essentially see the migration that we just basically ran, and this is the SQL command. So it created a table for users with all of these configuration. It also created a table for skills with all the configurations, as you can see, and you can also see it created an index on the user's email key, and also it updated the skills table to add this constraint. So this is nice. That means if I go to PostgreSQL Explorer, right click here, refresh now, you can see that now we have a couple of tables, including skills and users. And at any time, I can just right click here, say select the top 1000, and you'll see that it will bring the top 1000. Right now, it doesn't bring anything because there are none. So it only makes sense. Now we actually have our database schema done. So I'm going to start copying some files. We're going to start with source here. And if I go to source, I'm going to look at first the library. The library had Prisma.ts and auth.ts. So I'm going to actually copy the Prisma.ts. I think we already did that, but just for the sake of double checking it, I can go to app, I can go to lib Prisma.ts and just copy paste it like this. Then I'm going to go to the other file, which is auth.ts. So I'm going to quickly copy this as well, and we'll see one by one what this does, and we'll debug into how it does it. So auth.ts is here as well. So I'm going to save this right here, which also reminds me that we need to install this package called bcrypt.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go ahead and run npm install bcrypt.js. And now we have that installed quickly. Now I quickly want to go to the app itself. So we went through the lib. We do have some hooks here like use auth hook, and we discussed about custom hooks as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly copy the use auth hook. I'm going to go to my files here, and inside here in the app folder, I'm going to create a new folder called hooks. I'm going to go ahead and say use auth.tsx. And in here, I'm going to paste this whole file. So we do have our custom use auth hook here. Now I'm going to go towards the app, but I do want to go especially towards the auth functions. So here we have auth, having login, register, and layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the layout first. So we are updating our login and sign up pages, etc. So if I go to my terminal again, and here you can see that one terminal is already running Docker. So we'll keep that running. The other one, we can run npm run dev. So it starts up our Next.js application. You can see we don't have any errors at the moment. In the auth, we should have a layout.tsx. So here, I'm going to say layout.tsx. I'm going to quickly paste this here and save. Now, if I go to my browser, you're going to see that when we go to login or register, for example, login has this centered UI right here. If I go to register, you can see that that is also a bit centered. So we have the layout effect right here, which is centering everything. So we have minimum height, which is being calculated right here, then item center, justify center, and whatnot. Now we're going to go and copy the login and sign up pages. So I'm going to go to first login, page.tsx, and copy the raw file. Then we are going to go to login, page.tsx, and just paste it here. Now you can see here that we are using this sort of alias for hooks use auth. I'm going to tell you how to fix it, but you can always find all of this right here. So if I go to source app here, you can see we should have actually in the source, we should have the hooks folder, which has the use auth, but the aliasing or how we essentially achieve this @sign thingy, that happens within tsconfig.json. So here you should be able to see the paths, which is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tsconfig.json, and in here, we do have this right here, but I'm going to change this to what it had there. So I'm going to paste it like this. But instead of source, I'm going to say app and save this. Now, if I go to the page.tsx, you can see automatically everything is resolved. So @ means anything inside app, because we don't usually have things outside of the app folder that we want to access essentially. So it makes sense to just change that to app. Now that we have this done, let's go back to the login page and let's see what it looks like. So if I go to the login page, it actually throws an error, and that is because we are missing something, but we'll get to that. So now that we have the login implemented, we need to fix the first page that we should look at, and that is inside source we have app, and inside that we have all these important files: error tsx, global CSS, layout TSX, loading, not found, page, all of those. So I'm going to start with the layout TSX, and I'm going to quickly copy this. Then we are going to go to our app file, and I'm going to change the layout.tsx. Now let's quickly have a look at what changes. So we had a simple header and a children right here. Now if I replace this, you can see we have a bunch of things. We do have this thing called providers, then the header, then the footer, and then a few more things. But here you also see some things like a component is missing, the footer component. Then we have a provider that's also missing. So we did not discuss about providers or hooks because that's covered in my React tutorial that you can see here. But essentially that's what we need. So I'm going to go to app, and I'm going to go towards actually above source, and I'm going to go to components, and first I'm going to copy providers.tsx. So let's quickly copy this. I'm going to go to components / and here I'm going to say providers.tsx and quickly paste it. Then I'm going to go one level above, and I'm going to say footer. So remember, first we are just looking into making the login work. So I'm going to go here, say footer.tsx. But the thing is, we can't really go to login if we don't have the layout fixed. So here, everything should be fixed. So we do have the components / footer, component / providers. I think this should have solved itself. But if I close, open the layout TSX, it seems like it's not. So we have the app folder inside which we have components. Inside we have footer.tsx and providers. And I wonder why that is. I can see the header TSX has an export default function. This one also has, this one also has it, but not the default one, so to say. But this one also has a function, but it's not default, but I think it should be okay. So we have the layout file here. If I look at the file, let's say I run the npm run dev again. In here, it doesn't throw any error, which means if I go to my browser, go to the login page, here we go. You can see that the login page works without any errors. So I think it's just something in the VS Code. So here we have the login page, which means that if I go to my sign up page from here, you can see it goes to the register page. If I click back, you can see it comes back to the sign up page. Now let's actually try to go and have the register page as well. So I'm going to go to the register page now, and I'm going to go to phtsx and copy this and go back to auth register page tsx and just replace all of this and save. And now if I go back to my application now, you can see that if I click sign up, we see the sign up page. If I click sign in, we see the sign in page. So we have done a couple of things that I want to show you. First of all, we added these Docker Compose YAML. We installed some packages. I'm just going to add those files so they go out of the way. Then we updated the Prisma config, or we just copy pasted it. Then in the JSON file, we changed this to app. Then in the layout TSX, we changed the whole file. So that is an important part right there. Then we update the layout TSX, that is the auth layout. And then we added the login and the register pages. So we did all those things. And I want to cancel this. Yes, yes, and yes. Then we added the footer component, the providers component, a hook that is use auth, the auth TS library, which essentially is used for login, and then some things related to Prisma. So I'm going to add all those changes for now, but let's actually try them out now. So I'm going to go to register, and in here, I'm going to say my name is Mohammed Hassan. In here, I'm going to go ahead quickly and say the email is, let's say, and here I can give a password, another password right here, and create an account. Let's see what happens. If I click this, you can see that it says unexpected doc type, not valid JSON. So we are failing in here because the post of API auth register does not exist. That's why we are getting a 404. So we cannot create a user at the moment. Then if I do the sign in thing, I think it's going to be the same. So if I say the same email and use the password, here it's going to be 404 as well. So let's now make the login and sign up work by copying the APIs. So I'm going to go to source, and in here, I'm going to go to app, and in here, API, and then we have auth. In the auth, we have login, logout, me, register. So first, let's go to register, route.ts. So this is when we are on the register page and we want to make an API call. So I'm going to copy this whole request, and I'm going to close all these files for now. And I'm going to go to API. Here, I'm going to create a new folder, register. And here, I'm going to go and say route.ts. And here, I'm going to paste the file now. And if we look at the file, let's see what happens. We make a post call. In the request, we pass email, password, and name, all three things. If we miss anything, we send back a JSON with a 400. If we don't miss anything, then we check if the user already exists in the database where the email matches the user. So if I have already an account, I shouldn't be able to create an account again. If we already have an existing user, then we return this message that no, that's not allowed. Otherwise, we use this package called bcrypt, and we use this hash password method from it, and we essentially hash the password. So we don't obviously save plain passwords in our database. So we hash the password, we save that password, and we create a new user with that email, hashed password, and the name. We're going to see that in just a bit. Then we generate a token for that user so they can log in. When we generate the token right here, we essentially set this in the cookie for this particular user, and then we send back the response with that cookie. So here, when we register, essentially all of this should happen. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to go to the browser, and in here now we can try this. So I'm going to say my name is Mohammed Hassan, and then I give my email, and then I type my password. And now what I want you to see is the network call here. So I'm going to clear everything, and now if I say create account, we essentially went here, which is register 404 not working. So we should have had API/auth/register. This is the URL the front end is expecting, but the backend doesn't have it. So we have to fix it. So it should be inside API/auth, and the register should be inside it. As I mentioned before, the folder structure and the routes are super important. So that is what should happen. So if I now try the same thing again, let's see what happens. I'm going to click create account, and here you can see that we got a 201. And then it redirected us directly to the dashboard. Now the problem here is that we don't have a dashboard, but we got a 201, which means that the user was created, and I can show you the user in just a second. But since we already have a cookie in the backend being set, we can actually test it. If I go to application, if I go to cookies, go to localhost 3000 right here, you will actually see we have this auth token cookie. This is what the backend has set. If this is there, that means I'm logged in. If this is not there, that means I'm not really logged in and I have to log in again. And the cookie expires after a while as well. So we can see the expiry right here as well. So if I open this, you can see exactly when this is going to be expired. Okay, great. So we don't have the dashboard, but that's fine. Now we can see the user in the database. So if I go to Postgres here, right click here, refresh items, and go to my users and right click and select the top 1000, we should have someone here unless we are mistaken. So we should have had an auth user registered, but why don't we have it? I think the problem is with this register thingy. It's not able to show the query at all. That's a problem. So we essentially can go here, go to public, and then right click the user, and then can do run select top 1000. And in here you can see the request coming in. So this is the email, this is the ID, which is auto generated, and then here you can see the password is saved in hash, and here you can see the name, the created at, and the updated at, and essentially that's what we are talking about. So now we have at least the user being created. Now let's try to log in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first restart my server, which I mistakenly closed. So I'm going to open this, I'm going to run npm run dev, and I've switched my editor because it needed some update because of not running the extensions correctly. So I'm going to quickly go back to the UI here, and now I am in login. Now I'm going to show you that this actually works when it comes to login, but the login API is not copied so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and remove or clear all of these cookies. So how do I do that? I right click, I go to inspect, I go to application from this menu, And then in the application, I go to cookies, I go to localhost 3000, and in here, I can just go ahead and click this button, which is clear all cookies. So now our cookies are clear. So what should happen now is that once I actually go ahead and write my email and the password that I used, it essentially should work, but it says unexpected token because this is not implemented at the moment. So I'm going to go to the reference files again, and I'm going to go to auth, and in here you can see that we have app API and then auth, and inside here we have register. I'm going to go to register and route.ts. I'm going to quickly copy this, and then I'm going to go back to my code base here, go to app API auth, and in here you can see register has a route.ts, but I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to say login should have a route.ts in here, and I can delete the one that is outside. So we have one in auth and one here. I'm going to just delete this particular login file. So the one that is in API/auth, I'm going to go here, route.ts, and just paste it. And if we look at the code at this one is also pretty similar. So here you can see that this is a post call, and the post call receives the email and the password and the name. I'm going to double check if we need the name here. I don't think the name is required here. I think this is a copy paste error. So this is still register. So I should have copied the login one. So if I go to login, route.ts, and copy this, I'm going to go back to my editor, select all and paste. And here now you see that in the body, we just passed the email and password. If any of that was missing, then we essentially return back this error. Then we try to find the user. So in the database, we check, hey, Prisma, can you find a user by this unique approach where we compare the email? So we already are sending this email from the browser. So when we are on the login page, we send this email, right? And you can check by right-clicking inspect and network. And here you want to clear the request first. When you say sign in, it's going to make this API call. And now it worked because we do have that, but let's change this to something else so we don't really see what's happening there. So I'm going to go to login again. I'm going to try to write my email, and here I'm going to type some random password. So if I say sign in which case there's nothing there, you can click here, see the payload. This is what we are sending. We're essentially sending this whole thing here, which is the email and then the password. And then this is the response that we get back. We essentially get a 404 page because the route doesn't exist, right? So I'm going to fix this now. So what happens then is that it takes the email and the password that we are sending. It looks at the user. If it can't find an email that exists right there, then it should just, send back an error. When it finds it, it essentially checks if the password is valid. It uses this verify password method, which comes from bcrypt. So we take the user's password that is being passed from the form. So the user types the password, sends in the login form, we take that, and then we compare it with the hash of the user that's saved in the database. So we compare the password with this hash using the libraries method. So the bcrypt.compare essentially compares the plain text with this hash, and if it works, then yeah, it's an okay. Otherwise it's not an okay. So if it's a valid password, then if it's not a valid password, then we send back this message. Otherwise we generate a token. We do again the same thing. We set the cookie, we create a response back, and then we send back the response that has the cookie. So here let's actually try this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first try an email that doesn't exist with the correct route. So if I hit send here, you're going to see that we got a 401 with an error that says invalid email or password. So if I click this, you can see that we pass some email and password. Then you can see here that the preview shows the response that comes back from the server, invalid email or password. That's coming exactly from here, invalid email or password, right? Then we have a response, or actually it's coming from here if the user is not found. So if the user is not found, it just says invalid email or password. You could be more explicit. You could say here that the user doesn't exist. Sometimes that's considered as a security flaw because the system should not be able to tell you if the user exists or not in a system. So let's say we now try the right email which exists, but we make some weird password. So if I do this, it's exactly the same error, but it's coming now from this side where it can't really verify the password. So here we could try to just change it for the time being to just see that this error is coming back. So if I submit this again, you can see that it says invalid password. So it's essentially coming from exactly this space, but I'm going to revert it because I want these errors to be the same. If it's valid, then it generates the token and then sets the auth cookie. So I'm going to go to application right now, and I'm going to remove all the cookies because it worked previously and we logged in. So I'm going to now use the right password. So let's quickly do that. And if I sign in now, you can see everything worked. And if I go back to my application now, you can see auth token is generated in the cookies. So I have a logged in session now. Super nice. Now that we have this, let's actually move forward. So what are the other things that we need to copy paste? So let's quickly first try to copy all APIs. So I already did the login, the register, but I want to have the me and the logout one. So I'm going to quickly copy the route TS for me. So copy this, and then I want to go to auth, create a new file, say me/route.ts, and then quickly paste it. This essentially looks at the cookie already in the user's call. It extracts out the token, and then it sees if the user exists or it can verify the token, then we're good. Otherwise, it just says, nope, the user doesn't exist, and we have a 401, which means you can't access this. Otherwise, it sends back the user's email and ID and the name, etc. So this call is implemented now. Now we go back and we do another call, which was logout. So if the user wants to log out, they would be hitting this API call, which essentially just clears the cookie. And we're going to quickly implement that in API auth. So it should be logout/ and it should be route.ts. So here now we have the logout folder and the route TS. This one essentially generates a response, clears the auth cookie using the lib auth, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. But it clears the cookie just like this. So it sets the response cookie with setting the cookie name to empty. So it just does it empty. Also sets the max age to 0. So when we hit the logout route, it's just gonna end it essentially. So now that we have the API and auth done, what I want to do is to go ahead and implement the header component. So I'm going to go to components, and I want to copy the header component. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and copy this, go back to our application, and I want to go to source, or we don't have a source, but app components, header component. Here we had a simple one like skills about login register. I'm going to paste the actual one. In this one, we have a bit much more. So we do have an SVG right here. We have the link for browse skills. We have a dashboard link here, agent skills, and some other things as well. So if I go to the browser now, let's see what happens, even if it works. So here you can see that we have this robot here, we have agent skills, it says browse skills, and then dashboard, and then it has an avatar right here. So if I go to browse skills, I essentially go to the skills page that we implemented before, right? If I go to dashboard, we haven't implemented yet, so yeah, it doesn't really work. But we also see this guy right here, which is essentially a drop down. So we do have the links right here as well: dashboard, create skill, logout. I could go to create skill from here, but it seems like it's not the link that we had before. But if I look at here, you see a subtle thing here. We have a loading right here, and then you see this avatar right here. So how does it work? If I go down here, you're going to see that we check with a variable. In the header.tsx, we can see that if the user is authenticated, or first, if it's loading, then we see the loading indicator. So if I go back to the browser now, go to the app itself, you can see that initially we see a quick loading indicator right here. So if it's loading, then it shows the loading indicator. Otherwise, if it's authenticated, then it shows this sort of avatar with the character name. So here it takes my name, Muhammad Hassan, and takes out the M from it and then shows it. And you can see the BG primary right here, resulting in this sort of purple background. If it's not authenticated, then we should see something else. So let's see. If it's not authenticated, we see the login and the sign up buttons. So when it's logged in, not only it shows the avatar, but also shows this drop down, which contains the dashboard link, the create skill link, and the logout. So if I go and click the logout button, you're going to see that we log out and now we see the login and sign up button. So that's how the authentication is working. And the authentication is also using our hook that we created, that's called use auth. So whenever we log in, we are storing the information or the state of being logged in or not within this hook. So you can essentially open this and you can study where the state is being saved. But here you can see the auth state right here, which has the user, which has the boolean if it's authenticated or not, or if the authentication is loading at the moment. So when we refresh, this is loading, but after we have loaded the authentication, we set it back to false. And you can essentially search the code here. So here you can see whenever we have the response back using API auth me, we set the loading to false again. Anyways, now we have a complete flow where we can essentially log in from the login page to the dashboards, and the dashboard doesn't exist at the moment. But if I sign in right now, ooh, that's a new one, internal server error. So let's have a look at what's happening. Aha, so here it says Prisma user find unique invocation in here. Interesting. It seems like we are making the wrong call maybe. So double check this. So if I go to login, route TS, here we get the email and password, and then here we do the find unique. And it says here the connection is refused, and that could be because I'm not running the Docker container anymore. So let's quickly run Docker compose up right here. Yes, so this is running now. If I restart my server, go back here and then sign in, here you can see we signed in now. So I should be able to say write this and hit enter. And here you can see we now move to the dashboard, which is not implemented at the moment. And when we are logged in, we see all these links as well. Great. Now we're going to implement the dashboard page and whatever comes within. But also I want to show you whenever we refresh the page, you'll see that we make this API call, which determines if you are logged in or not. So we make this call, which is localhost API auth/me. And in here, we get the response back, the user and the email and the ID and the name. And we can look at that in the code as well. So in the API auth, we have this me route. If you go there, you can see that this is a get call. It essentially looks at the cookie as we saw before, and then verifies the token and then sends this information back, which is exactly what we saw here in the response. So let's copy the dashboard now. So I'm going to go here and then I'm going to click this here, and there should not be a group here. So this is probably a mistake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy the paste TSX from dashboard. So I'm going to quickly copy this. I'm going to go here, and in here in the app folder right here at the top, I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to say dashboard/page.tsx. And if I open this now, you can see that we have this dashboard folder having the page TSX. I'm going to save this right now, and there we go. Now you can see that here, the link here says delete skill, which has app. So this is probably wrong, but I'm going to fix that. Or if I don't, just update it like this. So here you can see that we should have some actions having skills, and we don't have the delete skill there. So if I open the actions file, I do have the skills TS there. It contains create skill. It contains this create skill method, but not the other one. So I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to go to app folder. Inside here, we have actions and skills.ts. So I'm going to quickly copy this one, and I'm going to go and select all and just replace all of this. So this is still a use server function, but we have updated the functions to have create skill right here. Then we have update skill in case someone wants to update the content of it, and then delete skill as well. So all these functions are here. Now, if I go to page TSX, you can see that we are importing the delete skill and everything else looks okay, which means that I should be able to go to my browser now and I should be able to run the dashboard until there's a problem. So let's quickly refresh and see. So here we have the dashboard. You can see that it says total skills are 0, public skill 0, private skill are 0. So everything is essentially is 0. If I click create skill, that's not going to work because we don't have the route. So if I click this skills/new route does not exist. So if I go and click here, this also brings us to this route, which doesn't exist. So the next thing is, of course, to implement that. So I'm going to go to app dashboard. Inside here, we have skills, and in the skills, we have new and edit. So let's work with the new one first. I'm going to quickly go to page TSX inside new, and we're going to try to keep the same URL. So it's dashboard skills new. We're not going to have this group. So just dashboard skills new page TSX. So I'm going to go to dashboard here, and here I'm going to create a new file, but I'm going to create folders as well. So skills /new/page.tsx. That's the shortcut for creating the file in the folders. And here I'm pasting the content. Now the create skill also should be just from actions skills. So I'm going to save this now. And the next thing that we need is the edit skill. So I'm going to go to skills. I'm going to go to id/edit and here page.tsx. So here you can see that we have this dashboard, skills, id, edit, page tsx. So we need the skills, id, edit, page tsx. So I'm going to go here. So we already have a skills. I'm going to create a new file inside skills. I'm going to call this id/page.tsx. And now we have the right folder. So we have dashboard, skills, id, page tsx. And I'm going to paste it here. Probably have to adjust this here. There we go. And now I'm going to just save it. And now we should have the add and edit. So here you can see already this page is being rendered because I put that in the right route. So I can go back to dashboard. I can create a new skill, back, forward, all of this works. Now the question would be, can I really create a skill at this moment? So let's try it out. So I'm going to say test skill here and give it a description. So my description, I'm going to leave everything else as it is and make this skill public. So I'm going to create this and now I don't see it at all. So if I refresh now, do I see them? No. So I don't see them at the moment. If I go to browse skills, do I see them there? Well, probably not because we still have the old code here, right? So we created a skill. We did not see any issue. So let's try out and see, do we have that in the database? So I'm going to go to the skills database, skills DB, public, and in here, right click and select the top 1000. And here you can see we already have this in the database. So we have the test skill, we have my description and the content right there. So this should be in the database now, but we are not really getting any skills in the dashboard. And if you look at the bottom here in the console where we are running npm run dev for the application, you can see it says API skills 404. So we don't have the API calls for skills at the moment. We have the ability to create a skill. We have the ability to edit a particular skill, but not really retrieving skills. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the browser here and then look at the API. So inside the app folder, we have API and we have skills. Inside the skills, we have route.ts. So let's make sure that we have this one first. So I'm going to copy this file and then I'm going to go to my file structure, API. You can see here, we just have auth. We don't have skills. So I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to first create the folder. So skills / and then route.ts. So now we have in the API two folders, auth and skills. In the skills, we have route.ts and this is the content that I'm copy pasting. So essentially this only has a get route, which looks at the token first to make sure that we have an authenticated user trying to get their skills. And then we go ahead and we verify the token. Then we say find all the skills that has the author ID of the logged in user. And we do that by using this payload. So here we first take out the token from the cookies of the logged in user. We take out the information from there. This payload contains the user ID and we compare, okay, bring from the database any skill that has the author ID of the logged in user ID. And here you can see that in the database, we do put the user ID as well. So here we have the author ID set to 1. So we have one user, we have one skill, and the ID of the user that we have right now is 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and save this file. And now we should be able to hit that API. So if I go to my browser, quick refresh now, you can see now we get the test skill. Pretty nice. And you can also see in here in the console, we get API skills having 200. Super nice. So I could now edit this or delete this. If I click edit here, you can see already at the bottom right here that we get the URL perfectly filled out. So we have dashboard /skills/1/edit. If I click this, you can see that we come to this page, but this doesn't render anything. Let's see why that is. Because we are trying to go to dashboard skills 1 edit. Where did we make the mistake of this particular ID part? So here we have dashboard skills and then I can see ID, but we did not have the edit route there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create a folder now and I'm going to say edit right here. And then I'll move this page TSX inside here. So now if I go back to my browser, here you can see it says skill not found. So we are probably missing something right there, but I can go back to dashboard. I can come here, and here it says skill not found. Why is it that we are getting a 404 when it comes to this particular skill? And the reason for that is in our API, we only have the route for getting all the skills of the user. We don't have a route for getting one particular skill, and that is because we have not created it. So ideally it should be /API/skill and then some sort of identifier and then the route.ts. So ideally it should be something like this. So we should have something like id and then /route.ts, something like this. So if I go back to my browser, I can quickly go and check it out. So in the API skills, we do have this ID folder, and inside the route.ts, this is exactly what we want to copy. So I'm going to copy this now, go back to my code and paste this here. So now here you can also look the same thing. Here we are trying to get the ID from the URL. Then we are verifying if we have the user as logged in. Then we are going and finding a unique skill, because when we are trying to get a skill by ID, that means there's only one in the database with that ID. So we go ahead and we say get the one that has the ID equal to the ID that we have right now in the URL. And when we have that, just include everything from this sort of key value pair and then return the skill back. So I'm going to save this now. And now if I go back to agent skills, refresh now, here you should be able to see that the edit skill page is being rendered, and not only rendered, it's being pre-filled with all the values, and that is really, really nice because now I can just update it. So instead of test skill like this, I could say test skill updated, something like this. And if I save the changes from here, now you can see now here as well, this is up to date. And if I go back to my code editor and try to go to my query right here, and if I think if I do F5, no, it doesn't do that. So I would have to close this guy, go to Postgres, get the skills, and you can see in the database as well, this is up to date. So that is exactly what we wanted to do. I'm going to close all these files, not the one that are not saved. So let's see. Okay, when did we change something in the validators? No, we don't want to save that, but we're going to close all of these. Great. Now that we have the possibility of actually editing a particular skill that you can see right here and creating new skills as well, what about deletion? So if I click delete here, you can see that it asks, do I want to delete this? And I'm going to show you that here we only have API skills 200 blah blah blah, but let's see if the delete call comes in here. So if I hit OK here, you can see that it got deleted. And if I go to the console here, you can see that we should have done a delete call right here, and I don't see it here, so we probably are not doing it. If I refresh now, okay, I don't see it, but I'm not really sure where it went. So I'm gonna try to get the top 1000 and I don't see them. So that means that we did make the API call, but it's probably not shown here, which is super interesting. But now I want to double check this. So if I go to the skills ID route, and this is the ID one, I should have a get here, but I do believe I should have a delete here as well, unless I'm doing it in another way. Oh, we do have the actions. That's where it's being deleted. So since I called the delete skill directly from the page here, so here you see the dashboard page, which is right here. And since we called the delete skill right away, that's why I'm not seeing an API call, because it's not an HTTP call. We are calling an action, a function directly from the front end. So since we call it, it essentially goes here. It then goes ahead and says, okay, I'm going to check, does that skill actually exist in the database? Yes, it does. If it does, then it goes ahead and says prisma.skill.delete. So it deletes the skill where the ID matches, which means that we are saying delete the skill with this ID. And then it goes ahead and deletes it. And then we go back to the dashboard page. Super nice. So here I'm able to make that work. So let's create a new skill. I'm going to call this test skill again, description, and I'm just going to do create skill. Now I see that in my dashboard, but what about the public skills? If I go to browse skills, that still shows the old code. So it doesn't show the recent code. So on the dashboard, I'm able to see my skills. I'm able to create skills. I'm able to delete skills. All of that works. I can log out. I can go to dashboard or create skill directly, as you can see right here. But the public skills are not implemented yet, and that is exactly what we have not copied so far. So just double checking, if I go to my app right now, we have all the pages of auth implemented perfectly. If I go outside of it, we have dashboard where we have skills, and all of these are implemented perfectly as well. Now we go to actions. The actions skills have been copied as well. If we go to API, and we have also copied the API for auth, which is for login, log out, me, and register. So the only thing that's remaining essentially is the skills, and then all these sort of global pages like error, layout, loading. So all of them are remaining as well. So let's first go through the skills page. In the skills page, we have a couple of things. We have the loading, we have the page TSX. So let's first go through page TSX. In here, I'm gonna just quickly copy this, and then I go here, and then let's update the skills page at the top. So in the app folder, we have skills, and in here we have page TSX. So I'm just going to replace all of this. Now let's quickly have a look at what this does. First of all, it has a function called get public skills. This directly calls the database. So this is a server-side function. So this directly calls the database for us, then it waits for them, and then once we have the skills coming in, that we can essentially render them one by one. So if I save this now, and if I go to my browser, go here, you can see that now the browse skills page shows this particular skill page right here, and you can see that it says this page uses incremental static regeneration, which means that it revalidates every 60 seconds. So here you can see at the top as well, we are doing a revalidation every 60 seconds, which means that this data might not be as up to date, so we'll just do a 60 seconds refresh. Now you can of course increase it to 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever, to show the public skills. Now that we have this, what about if I click here? This takes us to the old school detail page of skill. So we are going to also replace that as well. So this is the public skill page. Now what I'm going to do is, we already have the skill page done. Now I'm also going to go ahead with this loading TSX. This loading is supposed to render a bunch of cards, but we also have some nice styling here as well. So right now, if I refresh now, you saw how it looked. It essentially has this grid, which seems really weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to the loading TS and actually do this. So here you can see that we have about 6 cards that we should be showing, and they should be better placed. So those cards seem to be somewhat around here, you see. So instead of where they were before, now we can see it right here. Great. The next thing that we want to do is, we have now the loading and the page TSX. Now we're going to have the ID right here and page TSX. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and copy this. And this is supposed to be the detail page. When we click this particular link, this is what we are supposed to see. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to quickly go ahead and say, this is the identifier right here. And I'm going to rename this actually to ID to keep it consistent. And then I'm going to go to page TSX and just replace all of this here. So what this does is quite similar to the previous one. In here, we do see a generate metadata function, which essentially goes and finds the unique skill based on the ID, and then generates some title and description. But this is the actual function that brings the skill. So here it finds the unique one. It only brings those which are public. So if there's a private one, they won't be shown right here on this particular page. Then we have this skill detail page, or the component actually that renders. So let's quickly save this. And if I go to browse skills, and if I try to go here, well, it says it's not working. And the reason why it's not working perhaps is because we changed the slug names in the same sort of session. So we have to actually stop our server and restart again, because we can't do it while we are serving the application. So if I now go back to skills and click it again, you can see this is the detail page. So this is what users would see when they see this application. They can quickly go here, copy this skill, and then do whatever they want to do with that. So if I go back to skill, I can see all the public skills. If I click a skill, I come here and I can see that. Real nice. Now we also have the not found, we also have the loading. So if something goes wrong and we don't have the link found, we can still see that. For example, if I go here and say 22, you can see that we do still have this not found page. I would probably suggest you to change this a bit so you have it in a different way. But if we don't have a not found page here, we might have a global page that we can copy paste. So in here, if I go back to the app, now we have copied everything for skills. Now the global errors or global loading or layout is missing. So first, let's do the error one. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and copy it here. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this global error.tsx. and I'm just gonna paste it here. So here you can see we do have the global error. What's missing is the HTML and body. So I'm gonna quickly add the HTML right here and the body right here, and then I'm going to paste it. So if anything goes wrong, we should be able to see that. So if I browse skills, go here, but let's say we introduce some sort of error in there. So let's quickly close everything. And now I'm going to go to skills and then ID and then page.tsx. In here, instead of doing a not found, let's throw new error and say new error. So I want to see what it looks like when it comes to the errors. So here, let's try to find something that doesn't exist. And you can see that this is the global message. Something went wrong. We have this emoji, new error, go home or try again. If I try again, it's going to try again, but fail because it's the same sort of function. But if I go to 2, then it should be fine. So we checked how the error looks like. So I'm going to keep it like this. Also, we can look at the not found. So I can go back to this reference repository and go to the source app, and in here we do have the not found. I'm going to quickly copy this, go back, and I'm going to essentially update the top level not found. So here I'm going to quickly go and say not found.tsx, paste it right here. I'm pretty sure that we probably wouldn't need HTML and body here as well because this is global, but I'm just going to put it for now. So if I go back to my browser now, and if I refresh now, this is the 404 being triggered because we have it right here in the local version. So skills, ID, not found. We don't want this one. So I'm going to delete this guy, remove it. Now, if I go and see, this is the global one. So 404 page not found, the page you're looking for doesn't exist or has been moved. So since we have removed the local one of this particular route, it goes up and it finds the not found TSX and then sees this, the page you're looking for doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah. So all of this is working as intended. Now we can also have a global loading as well. So I'm going to quickly go to the app and copy this loading one, click it here, and then I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here, or I could click right here and then I can say loading.tsx. And I'm pretty sure it did not create where I wanted. Oh, actually it did. And now I can paste this. So this is essentially just a simple loading. So when I go here and if I refresh and if there's nothing, it would essentially sometimes just show loading. So if I go to dashboard, you can see this loading indicator. If I go to browse skills, click here. Now it seems like super fast, but you see this loader. This is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to loading indicator. So browse skills, it should show the loading indicator of the browse skills. But if I go here, then it shows the loading indicator of this particular thing, as you can see. So all of this is working as intended. I could remove the loading indicator of the ones inside. For example, this is skeleton, we probably don't need it. So if I remove it, you can see that when I go to a particular skill, you'll see the loading indicator instead of that. So this one has this grid of loading indicators as well. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the loading indicator from there as well. So just to double check, this is skills/ID. So we have the skills, and then this is the loading indicator for the multiple ones, but here we should have this one. So let me double check if there's a caching issue. So I'm gonna refresh now, go here. Oh, I see what the problem is. Since we don't have a loading indicator here, it's going above on the skills one and actually being triggered here, which is super interesting because I'm thinking how we would solve this particular issue. It could be possible that if we go ahead with just a grouping of skills like this, and I've not tried it by the way before, so this is new to me, and if it works, it would be like, aha, super nice. So if I put it here and if I save this, then aha, so here you see the loading indicator, but if I go back, no, then I don't see it on the list. So that's a bit tricky on how would you handle it if you wanted the loading indicator inside to be triggered but not outside. So that's a bit interesting, but I'm gonna put it outside anyways. And I'm gonna delete this guy, and now what we have is here we see the loading indicator of the grids. If we go in, then we see the loading indicator still. So ideally what we could do is, if we wanted the same loading indicator here as well, then we would just copy paste it. I think that's the easiest one for now. So you can see the loading indicator actually is the loading indicator and not like a skeleton. So that is one of the things that you could do, but I'm pretty sure you might have better sort of approaches to this. If you know some of those, just let me know in the comments. So we have a public skills gallery, and we also should have a private skills gallery. So now we have browse skills and dashboard. If I go to dashboard, I can create a skill. I can say this one is my private skill, not to be shared, and here I can just toggle it and say create skill. Now I have one that's private and one that's public. If I go to the browse skill, you can see the test skill is there. If I go to dashboard, I can see both of them, and I can even edit the one that is private. So here you can see all the values being filled. I could also go ahead and make this one private as well, save this, and if I go to browse skill, there's none there, and otherwise I could go ahead and make both of them public pretty easily, and you should be able to see both of them coming here as well. Super nice. Finally, we want to do two more things, and first of those is having this global CSS copied. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go to my globals CSS, and in here we have a bunch of things right here, but I'm going to just go ahead and paste all of this, save this. And then if I go to my browser, you can see everything still looks pretty nice. If I open this, a few of those things may change depending on where we are using the pros, especially if I go to dashboard and try to edit here, some of the things might change. So now that we have the global CSS, I also want to change the main page TSX, which is the home page, because if I go to the home page right now, it looks like this. No, this is not what we want. So if I go to my browser here, I can go to source, app, and page.tsx, and then just copy this guy, and then come here and then paste it, save it. And then if I go back to my home page, this is what it looks like. So we do have a really nice hero element here. We have the browse skills, get started. You can see about the project. So we have static site generation, ISR, SSR, CSR, and the tech stack mentioned here as well. Super nice. So here you can do get started, it takes you to the dashboard, and if you do browse skills, it takes you to the public skills. Also, if you are not logged in and you are at the home page, or you land on the website, you can essentially go ahead and say get started, which takes you to the login page, because you cannot directly go to the dashboard. So the routing or the route guards are also implemented there, and I can always go and log in just like this. And now you can see that everything works as it should. Now, the question would be, how do we really deploy this to production? So the first thing that you would want to do, of course, is to go to Vercel and create an account there, and then basically publish there, and then we would have to adjust the database as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how we can take this to production. So we're going to open Vercel.com, and the second thing that I want you to also open is NeonDB. So if you go to neon.com, you also want to log in there or sign up there. So use whatever account it supports to log in. For example, you can log in with GitHub or Google. I'm gonna use my Google account, and now I am actually logged in into my account. So I'm gonna do a new project right here. I'm gonna quickly go ahead and call this skills_db, and you can pick any of those providers as long as it's free, I think, and then go ahead and create it. And before creating, you can either choose Postgres 16. Right now, by default, it supports 17, but I don't think it's going to be much of a difference. So you can go ahead and create it. So once you essentially log in on Vercel as well, you can add a new project, and then you would have to import from your GitHub repository. So I have not pushed my code to the repository at the moment, but I'm going to quickly do so. I'm going to quickly go ahead here, and I'm going to stop the server, do a git status. And then what I'll make sure is that we have the env file that is right now having the database URL. So it looks like this at the moment. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and say git status, git add, and I don't have any remote setup at the moment. So I have to create a GitHub repository and then push there. So let's quickly do that. So I'm going to say git commit, and here I can for now say initial commit, or I can say sure prep for production, and then I have to link it to a remote. So let's quickly go ahead to GitHub, and I'm going to quickly create a repository there. I'm gonna go here, say new GitHub repository. I'm gonna say here agent-skills-manager, and then I can leave everything else as it is. I'm gonna just create the repository. I'm gonna copy this line because we already have a Git repository. So I'm gonna quickly go to my terminal, just paste this right here. So it's adding my GitHub repository as a remote and calling it origin. So I'll hit enter, and now you can just do git push -u origin main. So this will push the code to GitHub, and if I go to the GitHub repository, refresh quickly, you should be able to see all of this right here. Now I'm going to go to my Vercel account, and I'm going to say this is my GitHub URL. So I'm going to just paste it right here, click continue, and here you can see that it is ready to import this. So I'm going to just say create, and here it says it's already used for another repository name, which is interesting because I don't think I have that one. And yes, I can clearly see I don't have that one. So maybe, and I see that there is a message that says this name is already used for a different GitHub repository, and it's trying to actually create one. So we don't probably want to do that. We want to actually import a selected one. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and say add a new project right here. And I think we have a problem here because it's trying to clone an existing GitHub repository. So I'm going to say import a different GitHub repository, which still is breaking. So maybe their product is broken at the moment. Let me try to go to settings, and it does not seem like I have something important there. So if I go to add new, and then we have team member domain project. If I go to project, the problem is that it's taking me to this page, and it's also pre-filling this URL as well. So let's see if I can get rid of this really quick. Okay, so here now I can say import git repository. So I want to try to find agent skills manager. So it doesn't allow me. So I'm going to configure it. I'm going to quickly go to my account, and now it's asking me to validate this. And now I can select my repository. So I'm quickly going to go and select the repository. So I can say agent skills manager, which is right here. So I select this, I save this, and now I should be able to import this. So I can correctly import this. So do this and not the other way around. Now here we have the project name right here. We have the application preset, the root directory. I would say leave everything as it is. We just need one thing, and that is the environment variables. So here we need to have the database underscore URL. This is super important, and we need to put this before going to deployment. So how do we do this? What I want you to do first is to look into your Neon DB and the project that you just created. Then you have to essentially go ahead and say connect, and in here you need your URL. So this is the connection string right here. Now I'm going to copy this snippet, and I'm going to go to my env variable right here, and I can quickly replace all of this with the actual code. So here you will notice that we do have a couple of things, and I'm going to of course revoke my password. So here you can see the URL starts with Postgres, then it gives a username. After the colon, it gives the password. So this is the password. Then it gives the whole URL. So at the rate, all of this is essentially what we had before with localhost, and then the database name. So essentially we need all of this. So let's just save this now. And now we can check if the database works by just running npx prisma migrate status. This would tell us if we can connect to the database and if we have the migrations applied already. Now here you can see that it says one migration found in Prisma migrations. The following migrations have not been yet applied, which is essentially showing that we are missing those migrations in the production database. So this is where you could start with just trying out the production database in your local machine. So I'm going to revert actually this, do it like this, and it's always good to have both of them, so I can comment one and use the other one. So to apply this in development, I would run Prisma migrate dev. To do this in production, I would run Prisma migrate deploy. So I already tested this in development, so I can say npx Prisma migrate deploy. And before I do so, I want to show you production right here. So if I go to tables, you will see that we don't have any tables whatsoever, because all we have done is that we have come to this platform neon.tech, we have created a project, and we have copied the connection string. Our application or our Prisma has not even interacted with this, and this is the first step that we are doing. So whenever you deploy, the first thing that you have to ensure is that your schema, your Prisma schema, has been applied to the database. So all these tables are created by the migrations we have already sort of implemented in our dev environment. So if I run this, it's going to deploy this whole thing or apply the migration, and we should be able to see the tables there. So this is successfully applied in production. So if I just refresh here, you can see already we have the users table right here. We have the skills table right here as well. And we're good to go. Now, even if you want, you can essentially go and run npm run dev, which is your local server here, and this would start interacting with the actual production database. For example, I could go ahead on my local host right now, which is right here. And now I can actually create a skill. I can even try to log in or log out, but maybe log in, log out won't really work, because if I try to sort of log in, it wouldn't work because the user is not in the production database. So if I try to go here and put my email and password, you should be able to see invalid email and password. So let's create a user for production. So here I'm going to say Asan Ayaz, just to have a different sort of avatar there. I can put my email right there. This is the password. This is the confirm password. And if I create the account here, now you can see that I'm logged in right here. And if I go to the Neon database, go to users, here you see my username as well, or my user row as well. And I am able to create, of course, the skills as well. So here I can say first skill, and this is my first skill. For example, I create the skill, and this is all happening in the production database. So if I go here, go to skills, here is the first skill that was just created. Super awesome, right? Now what I want to do is I want to go to my editor, and in the env file, I want to copy all of this so I can paste it in the environment variable. So I'm going to copy this, and this is called database_URL. So in Vercel, while we were deploying this, the database URL should be exactly what we just copied. And then I can say, okay, I just want to go ahead and deploy this. So I'm going to just close this, make sure we have this, and then deploy. And there we go. We can see already that we have one issue that's coming here. So we do have somewhere where we are using the skills, and that's not the correct path. So we're going to go to our code base now, and we're going to fix it. So here we should be able to find @/app, which is right here in the page, skills/create. And we never use this, so we might as well just delete this file. So this is going to go away, and we also should look into this ID. So we do have the page TSX. I think this is fine. We definitely need it for the public view, but we don't create publicly the skills. We have to log in and then create within our dashboard. So that is not required. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and go here, and you can obviously run this here as well. If you run npm run build without that change, then it should fail. But if you run it here successfully locally, that means that now you're safe to push. So it's not a good idea to just fix something and then push it and then see if it builds there. Just try the build here and see if it works. So here you can see we have a lot of things, and all the things in the API are functions. The dashboard page is static. The edit of a particular skill, that's of course a server-side rendered, because when you go to the edit page, it essentially fills in the information of the skill to be edited. Then the new is statically generated, and then we can interact with that. The login, register, skills, all of that is statically rendered. And then we have a particular skill. When you go there, then essentially it's dynamically fetched in that case. And this one, even though this is not static, which means that it essentially has to be rendered or revalidated, so to say, because skills change. So we are doing a 1 minute revalidation for the skills grid or the skills list. So yeah, this is what it is. So I'm gonna quickly go ahead and say git status, git add, and then I can say git commit, fix, and here I can say I'm fixing the CI, and I will delete the unnecessary route, right? So I can push it now, and if I go back to Vercel, it should start a new deploy, or we should be able to say, yeah, just deploy from main. So I'm going to go here and go to the project. And when we go to the project now, since it's already created, you can see in the deployments, there is an automated deployment that started already. So we don't have to worry about that. What we have to worry about is if our environment variable is in place. So if I go to environment variables, I can see the database URL here. You can click here to see it or to copy it, but it should be fine. Now, if I go to deployments, we have another error. So more opportunities to see what's wrong. Now here we have one more concern, and that is when we run locally our project, we do ensure that we have the Prisma client generated. So we have our Prisma schema, which is fine. Then we run the migrations, which go to the database, but our code interacts with the Prisma database or the Prisma ORM to the database via something called the Prisma client. So here in the skills, if you look at the route here, all we do is to work with this Prisma, which comes from the library, which uses the Prisma client. So here it is there, but not really at the production site or Vercel. But the fun part is, if I go to the deployment checklist, I should actually be able to see that we needed that. So for example, if you look at here the production checklist, you can see we should have a post install script, which should say Prisma generate. So I'm going to actually copy this, and the rest of the things seem to be there. I'm going to quickly go ahead and go to the package.json, and here I'm quickly going to add a post install script, and in here I'm going to say npx Prisma generate. So let's quickly save this, and now I can also go ahead and say git add, git commit, fix ci add post install script, and then I can just go ahead and say git push, and now we can inspect our latest deployment. And there we go. You can see that this time it did not fail and it was actually deployed. So we see the same logs right here. So all of this is built, and you can also see that the deployment was successful with this green icon. If I go and click this visit button, you can see that here is our application live in production, working just fine. And you can also go ahead here to see the domains as well. So if I am able to find it, which should be in overview, and in here we have domains, and we have this agent skills manager.vercel.app. So I can essentially go to this particular route, which is a bit more user friendly, and I can also put that in the GitHub repository here. So I can quickly go ahead and put it right here so people can directly click here, and now you can essentially go ahead and log in production. So if I log in here with my email, you can see that I am able to see my first skill which I created, and I can also, even without logging in, see the browse skills as well. For example, I could log out from here, go to browse skills, and I can see the skills right there as well. I can copy them as well. Everything works as it should. Well, now that we have built the application, don't forget to check the resources. For example, it's always a good idea to go to the official Next.js docs. Same goes for the Prisma docs, same goes for the DaisyUI components and Tailwind CSS. And you can of course inspect the code to learn more, tweak a bit, add more features. You could also try to add smaller features. For example, just for copying the content of the skill, maybe add a copy button right here that when you click, it says copied or something like that. So make minor tweaks and make this project your own if you really want to make this part of your own portfolio. Well, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. This video was a bit longer than I thought, and even though I really enjoy creating these videos so I can share the knowledge with you, it takes a lot of time and effort, and sometimes I actually lose my voice. So it would be really nice that if you like the video, smash the like button as hard as you can, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the future videos. Also share this with other people. My Angular course has almost reached 0.6 million views, and I hope that this one also gets a lot of reach so a lot of people can learn Next.js in the best way possible and create projects that they can show off to others. If you are someone who does not feel confident in React and understands Urdu or Hindi, check out this particular course on Udemy, which has more than 300 students who are learning React.js in Urdu/Hindi. And if you know someone or are someone who is absolute beginner to the web development world and are afraid that AI is not really letting you learn web development as you should, check out my 4th book, which is Zero to Website, that comes with an AI platform, and it has an amazing Socratic AI that never gives you the right answer but rather pushes you to think and to evaluate your learning from the book. So if you're interested in that, check out the link in the description for Zero to Website. With that said, let me know in the comments what's the next video you want me to do a deep dive on, or if there's anything that you could have changed in this video if you created this tutorial. So let me know in the comments. As always, happy coding. I'm gonna see you next time.